Rather, so you are taking up writing again. Portlaw nodded. I have come to the conclusion that I need exercise. Malcourt, who had been urging him for years to exercise, nodded approval, as though the suggestion were a brand new one. Yes, said Portlaw, I shall ride, I think, every day. I intend to do a good bit of tramping, too. It's excellent for the liver, Louis. At this piece of inspired information, Malcourt assumed an expression of deepest interest, but hoped Portlaw might not overdo it. I am going to diet, too, observed Portlaw, watching the effect of this astounding statement on his superintendent. My theory is that we all eat too much. Do not do anything Spartan, said Malcourt warningly, a man at your time of life. Me what, confound it, Louis, I am well this side of 40. Yes, perhaps, but when a man reaches your age, there is not much left for him but the happiness of overeating. What do I mean? Nothing, only as he's out of the race with younger men as far as a pretty woman is concerned. Who's out? Demanded Portlaw, red in the face. What sort of men do you suppose interest women? Broilers. I always thought your knowledge of women was superficial, now I know it. And you do not know everything about everything else, either about summonses and lawsuits, for example. And he cast an exultant look at his superintendent. But Malcourt let him tell the news in his own way. And he did, imparting it in bits with naive enjoyment, apparently utterly unconscious that he was doing exactly what his superintendent had told him to do. You are a diplomat, are not you? Said Malcourt with a weary smile. A little, admitted Portlaw modestly. I merely mentioned these things. He waved his hand to check any possible eulogy of himself from Malcourt. I will merely say this, that when I make up my mind to settle anything, he waved his hand again, condescendingly. That man, thought Malcourt, will be done for in a year. Any woman could have had him, the deuce of it was to find one who would take him. I think she's found. And looking up blandly. Porty, old fellow, you are really rather past the marrying age. I will do what I please, shouted Portlaw, exasperated. Malcourt had two ways of making Portlaw do a thing. One was to tell him not to, the other the reverse. He always ended by doing it anyway, but the quicker result was obtained by the first method. So Malcourt went to New York next morning, convinced that Portlaw's bachelor days were numbered. Aware, also, that as soon as Mrs. Scott took the helm his own tenure of office would promptly expire. He wished it to expire, easily, agreeably, naturally, and that is why he had chosen to shove Portlaw in the general direction of the hymeneal altar. He did not care very much for Portlaw, scarcely enough to avoid hurting his feelings by abandoning him. But now he had arranged it so that to all appearances the abandoning would be done by Portlaw, inspired by the stronger mind of Mrs. Scott. It had been easy and rather amusing to arrange. It saved wordy and endless disputes with Portlaw. It would give him a longed-for release from an occupation he had come to hate. Malcourt was tired. He wanted a year of freedom from dependence, surcease of responsibility, a year to roam where he wished, foregather with whom he pleased, haunt the places congenial to him, come and go unhampered, a year of idly 1 year. What remained for him to do after the year had expired he thought he understood. Yes, he was practically certain had always been. But first must come that wonderful year he had planned, or, if he tired of the pleasure sooner, then, as the caprice stirred him, he would do what he had planned to do ever since his father died. The details only remained to be settled. For Malcourt, with all the contradictions in his character, all his cynicism, effrontery, ruthlessness, preferred to do things in a manner calculated to spare the prejudices of others. And if there was a way to accomplish a thing without hurting people, he usually took the trouble to do it in that way. If not, he did it anyway. And now, at last, he saw before him the beginning of that curious year for which he had so long waited, and concerning the closing details of which he had pondered so often with his dark, handsome head lowered and slightly turned, listening, always listening. But nothing of this had he spoken of to his wife. It was not necessary. He had a year in which to live in a certain manner and do a certain thing, and it was going to amuse him to do it in a way which would harm nobody. The year promised to be an interesting one, to judge from all signs. For one item, his sister, Lady Trestlevane, was impending from Paris, also his brother-in-law, complicating the humor of the visitation. Malcourt's marriage to an heiress was the perfectly obvious incentive of the visit, and when they wrote that they were coming to New York, it amused Malcourt exceedingly to invite them to Luckless Lake. But he said nothing about it to Portlaw or his wife. Then, for another thing, the regeneration and development, ethically and artistically, of Dolly Wilming amused him. He wanted to be near enough to watch it without, however, any real faith in its continuation. And also, there was Miss Sidham. Her development would not be quite as agreeable to witness, process of disillusioning her, little by little, until he had undermined himself sufficiently to make the final break with her very easy for her. Of course it interested him. All intrigue did where skill was required with women. And last of all, yet of supreme importance, he desired leisure, undisturbed, to study his own cumulative development, to humorously thwart it, or misunderstand it, or slyly aid it now and then, always aware of and attentive to that extraneous something which held him so motionless, at moments, listening attentively as though to a command. For from that morning 4 years ago when, crushed with fatigue, he strove to keep his vigil beside his father who, toward daybreak, had been feigning sleep from that dreadful dawn when, waking with the crash of the shot in his ears, his blinded gaze beheld the passing of a soul, understood that he was no longer his own master. Not that the occult triad, chance, fate, and destiny ruled, they only modified his orbit. But from the center of things, something that ruled them was pulling him toward it, slowly, steadily, inexorably drawing him nearer, lessening the circumference of his path, attenuating it, circumscribing, limiting, controlling. And long since he had learned to name this thing, undismayed as one thing remaining in the world in which his father's son might take a sporting interest. He had been in New York 2 weeks, enjoying existence in his own fashion, untroubled by any demands, questions, or scruples concerning responsibility, when a passionate letter from Portlaw disturbed the placid interlude. "Confound it, Louis, have not you the common decency to come back when you know I have had a bunch of people here to be entertained? Nobody's heard a peep from you. What on earth do you mean by this? Miss Palliser, Mrs. Scott, Miss Cardross are here, also wayward, and Grey Cardross, which with you and Mrs. Malcourt and myself solves the bridge propositioner would have solved it. But without warning, yesterday, your sister and brother-in-law arrived, bag and baggage, and Mrs. Malcourt has given them the west wing of your house. I believe she was as astonished as I, but she will not admit it. I do not know whether this is some sorry jest of yours not, that Lady Trestlevane and her noble spouse are unwelcome, but, for heaven's sake, consider Wayward's feeling scooped up in camp with his ex-wife. It was not a very funny thing to do, Louis, but now that it's done you can come back and take care of the mess you have made. As for Mrs. Malcourt, she is not merely a trump, she is 100 aces and a grand slam in a redoubled without, if that's possible. But Mrs. Scott is my pillar of support in what might easily become a fool of a situation. And you amateur idiot, are down there in town, humorously awaiting the shriek of anguish from me. Well, you have heard me, but it's not a senseless shriek, it's a dignified protest. I tell you I have learned to depend on myself, recently at Mrs. Scott's suggestion, and I am doing it now by wiring Virginia Sidham to come and fill in the third table. Now I want you to come back at once. If you do not, I am going to have a serious talk with you, Louis. I have taken Mrs. Scott into my confidence more or less, and she agrees with me that I ought to lay down a strong, rigid policy, and that it is your duty to execute it. In fact, she also took me into her confidence, and gave me, at my request, a very clear idea of how she would run this place. And to my surprise and gratification, I find that her ideas of discipline, taste, and economy are exactly mine, although I thought of them first, and perhaps have influenced her in this matter as I have in others. That is, of course, natural, she being a woman. I think I ought to be frank with you, Louis. It is not good form for you to leave Mrs. Malcourt the way you do every week or two and disappear in New York, and give no explanation. You have not been married long enough to do that. It is not square to me, either. And while I am about it, I want to add that, At Mrs. Scott's suggestion, which really is my own idea, I have decided not to build all those Rhine castles, which useless notion, if I am not mistaken, originated with you. I do not want to disfigure my beautiful wilderness. Mrs. Scott and I had a very plain talk with Hamel, and we forced him to agree with us that the less he did to improve my place the better for the place. He seemed to take it good-humoredly. He left yesterday to look over Mrs. Scott's place and plan for her a formal garden and Trianon at Pride's Hall. So he being out, I wired also to Virginia and to Philip Gatewood, which will make it right for at a table. Your brother-in-law plays a stiff game, and your sister is a wonder. 5 grand slams last night. But I played like a dub. I'd been riding and walking and canoeing all day with Mrs. Scott, and I was terribly sleepy. So come on up, Louis. I will forgive Yao, but do not mind if I growl at you before Mrs. Scott, as she thinks I ought to discipline you. And confound it, I ought to, and I will too, if you do not look out. But I will be devilish glad to see you. Yours, W. Van Buren Portla. Malcourt, in his armchair by the open window, lay back full length, every fiber of him vibrating with laughter. Dolly Wilming at the piano continued running over the pretty firework melodies of last season's Metropolitan success, built entirely on a Viennese waltz, the air of which might have been taken from almost any popular Yankee hymn book. He folded Portla's letter and pocketed it, and lay for a while under the open window, enjoying his own noiseless mirth, gaily accompanied by Dolly Winning's fresh, clear singing or her capricious improvising. Begonias bloomed in a riotous row on the sill, nodding gently in the riverwind, which also fluttered the flags and sails on yacht, schooner, and sloop under the wall of the palisades. That day the North River was more green than blue, like the eyes of a girl he knew. Summer, crowned and trimmed with green, brooded on the long rock rampart across the stream. Turquoise patches of sky and big clouds, leafy parapets, ships passing to the sea, and in midstream an anchored island of steel painted white and buff, bristling with long thin guns, the flower-like flag rippling astern, another battleship farther north, another, and farther still the white Tombin lovely mansion of the dead on outpost duty above the river, guarding with the warning of its dead glories the unlovely mansions of the living ranged along the most noble terrace in the world. And everywhere to north, south, and east, the endless waste of city, stark, clean-cut, naked alike of tree and of art, unsoftened even by the haze of its own exudations. Everywhere the wind-riddled blocks of oblongs and cubes, gridironed with steel rails. New York, in all the painted squalor of its Pueblo splendor. You say you are doing well in everything, except French and Italian. Dolly, still humming to her own accompaniment, looked over her shoulder and nodded. Well, how the dickens are you ever going to sing at either opera, or on the road or anywhere, if you do not learn French and Italian? I am trying, Louis. Go ahead, let's hear something then. And she sang very intelligently, and in excellent taste. Pendant que, plein d'amour, j'espère votre porte. Vous dormez d'un paisible sommeil. And turned questioningly to him. That's all right, try another. So serenely obedient, she sang. Chantons Marget, nos amours. Marget lest et bien tourner. Well, I do not see anything the matter with your French, he muttered. The girl colored with pleasure, resting pensively above the keyboard, but he had no further requests to make, and presently she swung around on the piano stool, looking at him. You sing all right, you are doing your part as far as I can discover. There is nothing for you to discover that I have not told you, she said gravely. In her manner there was a subdued dignity, which he had noticed recently, something of the self-confidence of the very young and unspoiled, which, considering all things, he could not exactly account for. Does that doddering old dancing master of yours behave himself? Yes, since you spoke to him. Mr. Balder came to the school again. What did you say to him? I told him that you would not let me sing in the Inca. And what did Balder say? He was persistent but perfectly respectful, asked if he might confer with you. He wrote to you, I think, did not he? Malcourt nodded and lighted a cigarette. Dolly, he said, do you want to sing Chask in the Inca next winter? Yes, I do if you think it is all right. She added in a low voice, I want to do what will please you, Louis. I do not know whether it's the best thing to do, but you may have to. He laid his cigarette in a saucer, watched the smoke curling ceilingward, and said as though to himself, I should like to be certain that you can support yourself within a reasonable time from no say a year. That is all, Dolly. I can do it now, if you wish it. The expression of his face checked her. I do not mean a variety career devoted to mother songs, he said with a sneer. There's a middle course between diamonds and sinkers. You will get there, if you do not kick over the traces. Have you made any more friends? Yes. Are they respectable? Yes, she said, coloring. Has anybody been impertinent? Mr. Williams. I will attend to him, little squirt. Who are your new friends? There's a perfectly sweet girl in the French class, Marguerite Barrett. I think she likes me, Louis. I do not believe you understand how very happy I am beginning to be. Do people come here? Yes, on Sunday afternoons. I know nearly a dozen nice girls now, and those men I told you about, Mr. Snyder, Mr. Jim Anthony and his brother the artist, and Mr. Cass and Mr. Renwick. You can cut out Renwick, he said briefly. She seemed surprised. He has always been perfectly nice to me, Louis. Cut him out, Dolly, I know the breed. Of course, if you wish. He looked at her, convinced in spite of himself. Always ask me about people. If I do not know, I can find out. I always do, she said. Yes, I believe you do. You are all right, Delisso far there. Do not look at me in that distressative fashion. I know you are all right and mean to be for your own sake. For yours also, she said. Oh, that's all right, Book fidelity, my preserver ever. What sure and a slow curtain there, Dolly, where's your sense of humor? Good Lord, what's changing you into a bread-and-butter boarding school sentimentalist, to feel hurt at nothing? Hello, look at that kitten of yours climbing your silk curtains. Spank the rascal. But the girl caught up the kitten and tucked it up under her chin, smiling across at Malcourt, who had picked up his hat, gloves, and stick. Will you come tomorrow? She asked. I am going away for a while. Her face fell. She rose, placed the kitten on the lounge, and walked up to him, both hands clasped loosely behind her back, wistfully acquiescent. It's going to be lonely again for me, she said. Nonsense, you have just read me your visiting list. I had rather have you here than anybody. Dolly, you will get over that absurd sense of obligatory regard for me. I had rather have you, Louis. I know, that's very sweet of you and very proper. You are all right. I will be back in a week or 10 days. And smilingly, mind you have your report ready. If you have been a good girl, we will talk over the Inca again, and perhaps we'll have Mr. Boulder up to luncheon. Goodbye. She gave him her hand, looking up into his face. Smile, he insisted. She smiled. So he went away, rather satiated with the pleasures of self-denial. But the lightly latent mockery soon broke out again in a smile as he reached the street. What a mess, he grinned to himself. The Trestlvanes at Portlaws, and Wayward, and Sheila and Virginia and that awful Louis Malcourt. It only wants Hamel to make the jolliest little hell of it. Oh my, what an amusing mess. However, he knew what Portlaw did not know, that Virginia would never accept that invitation, and that neither Wayward nor Constance Palliser would remain one day under the roof that harbored the sister of Louis Malcourt. Chapter 25, A Conference. When Malcourt arrived at Luckless Lake Sunday evening, he found Portlaw hunched up in an armchair, all alone in the living room, although the hour was still early. Where's your very agreeable house party? He inquired, looking about the empty room and hall with an air of troubled surprise. Gone to bed, replied Portlaw irritably, what's left of him? And he continued reading the pink un. Really, said Malcourt in polite concern. Yes, really, snapped Portlaw. Mrs. Scott went to Pride's and took Wayward and Constance Palliser, that was Friday. And Gray and Cecil joined them yesterday. It's been a horrible house party. Nobody had any use for anybody else, and it has rained every day and Danto be plain with you, Louis. Nobody is enchanted with your relatives, and that's the unpleasant truth. I do not blame anybody, returned Malcourt sincerely, removing his driving gloves and shaking off his wet box coat. Why, I can scarcely stand them myself, William. Where are they? In the west wing of your house preparing, to remain indefinitely. Dear, dear, exclaimed Malcourt, what on earth shall we do? And he peered sideways at Portlaw with his tongue in his cheek. I do not know. Why the devil did you suggest that they stop at your house? Because, William, curious as it may seem, I had a sort of weak-minded curiosity to see my sister once more. He walked over to the table, took a cigarette and lighted it, then stood regarding the burning match in his fingers. She's the last of the family. I will probably never see her again. She appears to be in excellent health, remarked Portlaw viciously. So am I, but he shrugged and tossed the embers of the match onto the hearth. But what? Well, I am going to take a vacation pretty soon, a sort of voyage, and a devilish long one, William. That's why I wanted to see her again. You mean to tell me you are going away? Demanded the other indignantly. Malcourt laughed. Oh, yes. I planned it long agoon morning toward daybreak years ago. A relative of mine started on the same voyage rather unexpectedly. I have heard very often from him since. I am curious to try it, too, when he makes up his mind to invite me. When are you starting? Interrupted Portlaw, disgusted. Oh, not for a while, I think. I will not embarrass you. I will leave everything in shipshape. Where are you going, damn it? Malcourt looked at him humorously, head on one side. I am not perfectly sure, dear friend. I hate to know all about a thing before I do it. Otherwise, there's no sporting interest in it. You mean to tell me that you are going off gypsying without any definite plans? Gypsying, he laughed. Well, that may perhaps describe it. I do not know, I have no plans, that's the charm of it. When one grows tired, that is the restful part of it. Simply start, having no plans, just to leave and drift away haphazard. One is always bound to arrive somewhere, William. He had been pacing backward and forward, the burning cigarette balanced between his fingers, turning his handsome head from time to answer Portlaw's ill-tempered questions. Now he halted, dark eyes roving about the room. They fell and lingered on a cartable where some empty glasses decorated the green baize top. Bridge, he queried. Unfortunately, growled Portlaw. Who? Mrs. Malcourt, and I versus your talented family. Mrs. Malcourt does not gamble. Trestlevane and I 999. Were you badly stung, dear friend? Portlaw muttered. Malcourt lifted his expressive eyebrows. Why did not you try my talented relative again tonight? Mrs. Malcourt had enough, said Portlaw briefly, then mumbled something injuriously unintelligible. I think I will go over to the house and see if my gifted brother-in-law has retired, said Malcourt, adding carelessly, I suppose Mrs. Malcourt is asleep. It would not surprise me, replied Portlaw, and Malcourt was free to interpret the remark as he chose. He went away thoughtfully, crossing the lawn in the rainy darkness, and came to the garden where his own dogs barked at him, a small thing to depress a man, but it did. And it was safer for the dogs, perhaps, that they sniffed recognition before they came too near with their growls and barking. But he opened the gate, disdaining to speak to them, and when they knew him, it was a pack of very humble, wet, and penitent hounds that came wagging up alongside. He let them wag unnoticed. Lights burned in his house, one in Shiella's apartments, several in the west wing where the Trestlvanes were housed. A servant, locking up for the night, came across the dripping veranda to admit him, and he went upstairs and knocked at his wife's door. Shiella's maid opened, hesitated, and a moment later Shiella appeared, fully dressed, a book in her hand. It was one of Hamel's architectural volumes. "Well, Shiella," he said lightly, "I got in tonight and rather expected to see somebody, but nobody waited up to see me. I am rather wetits renning, so I will not trouble you. I only wanted to say good night." The quick displeasure in her face died out. She dismissed the maid and came slowly forward. Beneath the light her face looked much thinner. He noticed dark shadows under the eyes. The eyes themselves seemed tired and expressionless. "Are not you well?" he asked bluntly. "Perfectly. Was it you the dogs were so noisy about just now?" "Yes, it seems that even my own dogs resent my return. Well, good night. I am glad you are all right." Something in his voice, more than in the words, arrested her listless attention. "Will you come in, Louis? I am afraid I am keeping you awake. Besides, I am wet. Come in and tell me where you have been if you care to. Would you like some tea or something?" He shook his head, but followed her into the small receiving room. There he declined an offered chair. "I have been in New York, no. I did not see your family as for what I have been doing." Her lifted eyes betrayed no curiosity. A growing sense of depression crept over him. "Oh well," he said, "it does not matter," and turned toward the door. She looked into the empty fireplace with a sigh. Then, gently, "I do not mean to make it any drearier for you than I can help." He considered her a moment. "Are you really well, Shiella?" "Why, yes, only a little tired. I do not sleep well." He nodded toward the west wing of the house. "Do they bother you?" She did not answer. He said, "Thank you for putting them up. We will get rid of them if they annoy you." "They are quite welcome." "That's very decent of you, Shiella. I dare say you have not found them congenial." "We have nothing in common. I think they consider me a fool." "Why?" He looked up, keenly humorous. "Because I do not understand their inquiries. Besides, I do not gamble." "What kind of inquiries do they make?" "Personal ones," she said quietly. He laughed. "They are probably more offensively impertinent than the Chinesithat sort of Briton. I think I will step into the West Wing and greet my relations. I will not impose them on you for very long. Do you know when they are going?" "I think they have made plans to remain here for a while." "Really?" he sneered. "Well, leave that to me, Shiella." So he crossed into the Western Wing and found the Trestlvanes tete-a-tete over a cartable, deeply interested in something that resembled legerdemain, and he stood at the door and watched them with a smile that was not agreeable. "Well, Helen," he said at last, and Lady Trestlvane started, and her husband rose to the full height of his 5 feet nothing, dropping the pack which he had been so nimbly manipulating for his wife's amusement. "Where the devil did you come from?" blurted his lordship, but his wife made a creditable appearance in her role of surprised sisterly affection, and when the two men had gone through the form of family greeting, they all sat down for the conventional family confab. Trestlvane said little, but drank a great deal of whiskey. His long, white, bony fingers were always spread around his glass, unusually long fingers for such a short man, and out of all proportion to the scant 5-foot frame, topped with a little pointed head, in which the eyes were set exactly as glass eyes are screwed into the mask of a fox. "Bertie and I have been practicing leads from trick hands," observed Lady Trestlvane, removing the ice from her glass and filling it from a soda bottle which Malcourt uncorked for her. "Well, Herbie," said Malcourt genially, "I suppose you and Helen play a game well worth a watching." Trestlvane looked dully annoyed, although there was nothing in his brother-in-law's remark to ruffle anybody, except that his lordship did not like to be called Herbie. He sat silent, caressing his glass, and presently his little black eyes stole around in Malcourt's direction and remained there waveringly, while brother and sister discussed the former's marriage, the situation at Luckless Lake, and future prospects. That is to say, Lady Trestlvane did the discussing. Malcourt, bland, amiable, remained uncommunicatively polite, parrying everything so innocently that his sister, deceived, became plainer in her questions concerning the fortune he was supposed to have married, and more persistent in her suggestions of a winter in New York, a delightful and prolonged family reunion, in which the Trestlvanes were to figure as distinguished guests and virtual pensioners of everybody connected with his wife's family. "Do you think," drawled Malcourt, intercepting a furtive glance between his sister and brother-in-law, to that gentleman's slight confusion, "do you think it might prove interesting to you and Herbie? Americans are so happy to have your countrymen to entertain, particularly when their credentials are as unquestionable as Herbie's and yours." For a full minute, in strained silence, the concentrated gaze of the Trestlvanes was focused upon the guileless countenance of Malcourt, and discovered nothing except a fatuous cordiality. Lady Trestlvane drew a deep, noiseless breath and glanced at her husband. "I do not understand, Louis, exactly what settlement, what sort of arrangement you made when you married this very interesting young girl." "Oh, I did not have anything to endow her with," said Malcourt, so amiably stupid that his sister bit her lip. Trestlvane essayed a jest. "Rather good that," he said with his short, barking laugh, "but I dassay the glove was on the other hand, Louis?" "What?" "Why, thief lady did the endowing and all that, do not you see?" "See what?" asked Malcourt so pleasantly that his sister shot a look at her husband which checked him. Malcourt was now on maliciously humorous terms with himself. He began to speak impulsively, affectionately, with all the appearance of a garrulous younger brother impatient to unbosom himself to his family, and he talked and talked, confidingly, guilelessly, voluminously, yet managed to say absolutely nothing. And strain their ears as they might, the Trestlvanes, in their perplexity and increasing impatience, could make out nothing of all this voluntary information, understand nothing, pick out not one single fact to satisfy their desperately hungry curiosity. There was no use interrupting him with questions, he answered them with others. He whispered ambiguities in a manner most portentous, hinted at bewildering paradoxes with an air, nodded mysterious nothings, and finally left them gaping at him, exasperated, unable to make any sense out of what most astonishingly resembled a candid revelation of the hopes, fears, ambitions, and worldly circumstances of Louis Malcourt. "Good night," he said, lingering at the door to look upon and enjoy the fruit of his perversity and malice. "When I start on that journey I mentioned to you, I will leave something for you and Herb Emerly to show you how much I think of my own people, a little gift, a trifle." Nano, lifting his hand with smiling depreciation as Trestlvane began to thank him. "One must look out for one's own family. It's naturally natural to make some provision. Good night, Helen. Good night, Herbie. Portlaw and I will take you on at bridge if it rains tomorrow. It will be a privilege for us to watch your game closely. Good night." And closed the door. "What the devil does he mean?" demanded Trestlvane, peering sideways at his wife. "I do not exactly know," she said thoughtfully, sorting the cards. She added, "If we play tomorrow you stick to signals, do you understand? And keep your ring and your fingers off the cards until I can make up my mind about my brother. You are a fool to drink American whiskey the way you did yesterday. Mr. Portlaw noticed the roughness on the aces, you pricked them too deep. You had better keep your wits about you, I can tell you. I am a Yankee myself." "Righto, but I say, Helen, I am damned if I make out that brother of yours. Does not he live in the same house as his wife?" Lady Trestlvane sat listening to the uproar from the dogs as Malcourt left the garden. But this time the outbreak was only a noisy welcome, and Malcourt, on excellent terms with himself, patted every sleek, wet head thrust up for caresses and walked gaily on through the driving rain. The rain continued the following day. Piloted by Malcourt, the Trestlvanes, thickly shod and waterproofed, tramped about with rod and creel and returned for luncheon, where their blunt criticisms on the fishing aroused Portlaw's implacable resentment. For they sneered at the trout, calling them char, patronized the rather scanty pheasantry, commented on the kennels, stables, and gardens in a manner that brought the red into Portlaw's face, and left him silent while luncheon lasted. After luncheon Trestlvane tried the billiards, but found the game inferior to the English game. So he burrowed into a box of cigars, established himself before the fire with all the newspapers, deploring the fact that the papers were not worth reading. Lady Trestlevane cornered Sheila and badgered her, and stared at her, until she dared not lift her hot face or open her lips lest the pent resentment escape. Portlaw smoked a pipe, a sure indication of smoldering wrath. Malcourt, at a desk, blew clouds of smoke from his cigarette and smilingly continued writing to his attorney. This is the general idea for the document, and it's up to you to fix it up and make it legal, and have it ready for me when I come to town. First, I want to leave all my property to a Miss Dorothy or Dolly Wilming, and I want you to sell off everything after my death and invest the proceeds for her, because it's all she will have to live on except what she gets by her own endeavors. This, in case I suddenly snuff out. 2D, I want to leave my English riding crop, spurs, bridle, and saddle to a Miss Virginia Sidham. Fix it legally. 3D, here is a list of 18 ladies. Each is to have one of my 18 Chinese gods. Fourth, to my wife I leave the 19th god. Mr. Hamill has it in his possession. I have no right to dispose of it, but he will have some day. Fifth, to John Garrett Hamill, 3D, I leave my volume of Jean Dumont, the same being an essay on friendship. Sixth, to my friend, William Van Buren Portlaw, I leave my dogs, rods, and guns with a recommendation that he use them and his legs. Seventh, to my sister, Lady Trestlevane, I leave my book of comic bridge rules, and to her husband a volume of Methodist hymns. I will be in town again, shortly, and expect you to have my will ready to be signed and witnessed. One ought always to be prepared, particularly when in excellent health. Yours sincerely, Louis Malcourt. P.S. I enclose a check for the Greenlawn Cemetery people. I wish you would see that they keep the hedge properly trimmed around my father's plot and renew the dead sod where needed. I noticed that one of the trees was also dead. Have them put in another and keep the flowers in good shape. I do not want anything dead around that lot. 51,000. When he had sealed and directed his letter, he looked around the silent room. Sheila was sewing by the window. Portlaw, back to the fire, stood staring out at the rain. Lady Trestlevane, a cigarette between her thin lips, wandered through the workshop and loading room where from hooks in the ceiling, a thicket of splitkin rodents hung, each suspended by a single strong thread. The loading room was lined with glass-faced cases containing fowling pieces, rifles, reels, and the inevitable cutlery and ironmongery associated with utensils for the murder of wild creatures. Trestlevane sat at the loading table to which he was screwing a delicate vise to hold hooks, for Malcourt had given him a lesson in flightying, and he meant to dress a dozen to try on Painted Creek. So he sorted snell and hook, and explored the tin trunk for hackles, silks, and feathers, up to his bony wrists in the fluffy heap of brilliant plumage, burrowing, busy as a burying beetle under a dead bird. Malcourt dropped his letter into the postbox, glanced uncertainly in the direction of his wife, but as she did not lift her head from her sewing, turned with a shrug and crossed the floor to where Portlaw stood scowling and sucking at his empty pipe. Look at that horrid little brother-in-law of mine with his ferret eyes and fox face, fussing around those featherses, though he had just caught and eaten the bird that wore them. Portlaw continued to scowl. Suppose we take them on at cards, suggested Malcourt. No thanks. Why not? They have taken 1,000 out of me already. Malcourt said quietly, You have never before given such a reason for discontinuing card playing. What's your real reason? Portlaw was silent. Did you quit 1,000 to the bad, Billy? Yes, I 999. Then why not get it back? I do not care to play, said Portlaw shortly. The eyes of the two men met. Are you by any chance afraid of our fox-faced guest? Asked Malcourt suavely. I do not care to give any reason, I tell you. That's serious, as there could be only one reason. Did you think you noticed anything? I do not know what I think I have half a mind. to stop payment on that check if that enlightens you any. There's an easier way, said Malcourt coolly. You know how it is in sparring. You forecast what your opponent is going to do and you stop him before he does it. I am not certain that headed it, muttered Portlaw. I cannot afford to make a mistake by kicking out your brother-in-law. Oh, do not mind me. I would not if I were sure. I wish I had that 1,000 back. It drives me crazy to think of losing it in that way. Oh, then you feel reasonably sure. No, confound it, the backs of the aces were slightly rough, but I can scarcely believe. Have you a magnifying glass? The pack has disappeared. I meant to try that. My dear fellow, said Malcourt calmly, it would not surprise me in the slightest to learn that Trestlevane is a blackguard. It's easy enough to get your 1,000 back. Shall we? How? Malcourt sauntered over to a card table, seated himself, motioned Portlaw to the chair opposite, and removed the cover from a new pack. Then, to Portlaw's astonishment, he began to take aces and court cards from any part of the pack at his pleasure. Any card that Portlaw called for was produced unerringly. Then Malcourt dealt him unbelievable hands, all of a color, all of a suit, all the cards below the tens, all above. And Portlaw, fascinated, watched the dark, deft fingers nimbly dealing, shuffling until his senses spun round. And when Malcourt finally tore up all the aces, and then, ripping the green baize cover from the table, disclosed the 4 aces underneath, intact, Portlaw, petrified, only stared at him out of distended eyes. Those are nice tricks, are not they? Asked Malcourt, smiling. Yis, Lord, Louis, I never dreamed you could do such devilish things as. I can. If I were not always behind you in my score, I would scarcely dare let you know what I might do if I chose. How far ahead is that little mink, yonder? Trestlevane. Yes. He has taken about 1,000 weight. Portlaw consulted his notebook, made a wry face, and gave Malcourt the exact total. Malcourt turned carelessly in his chair. Oh, Herbert, he called across to his brother-in-law, do not you and Helen want to take us on? Rather, replied Trestlevane briskly, and came trotting across the room, his close-set black eyes moving restlessly from Malcourt to Portlaw. Come on, Helen, said Malcourt, drawing up a chair for her, and his sister seated herself gracefully. A moment later the game began, Portlaw passing it over to Malcourt, who made it no trumps, and laid out all the materials for international trouble, including 100 aces. The games were brutally short, savage, decisive. Trestlevane lost countenance after the fastest 4 rubbers he had ever played, and shot an exasperated glance at his wife, who was staring thoughtfully at her brother. But that young man appeared to be in an innocently merry mood. He gaily taunted Herbie, as he chose to call him, with loss of nerve. He tormented his sister because she did not seem to know what Portlaw's discards meant, and no wonder, because he discarded from an obscure system taught him by Malcourt. Also, with a malice which Trestlevane ignored, he forced formalities, holding everybody ruthlessly to ironclad rule, taking penalties, enforcing the most rigid etiquette. For he was one of those rare players who knew the game so thoroughly that while he, and the man he had taught, often ignored the classics of adversary play, the slightest relaxing of etiquette, rule, precept, or precedent in his opponents brought him out with a protest exacting the last item of toll for indiscretion. Portlaw was perhaps the sounder player, Malcourt certainly the more brilliant. And now, for the first time since the advent of the Trestlvanes, the cards Portlaw held were good ones. What a nasty thing to do, said Lady Trestlevane sharply as her brother's finesse went through, and with it another rubber. It was horrid, was not it, Helen? I do not know what's got into you and Herbie, and to the latter's protest he added pleasantly, you talk like a bucket of ashes. Go on and deal. A what? Demanded Trestlevane angrily. It's an Americanism, observed his wife, surveying her cards with masked displeasure and making it spades. Louis, I never held such hands in all my life, she said, displaying the meager dummy. Do you good? Helen must not be too proud and haughty. No, no, good for you and Herbie. I wish you would not call him Herbie, snapped his sister. Not respectful, inquired Malcourt, lifting his eyebrows. Well, I will call him anything you like, Helen, I do not care, but make it something I can say when ladies are present. Trestlevaine's mink-like muzzle turned white with rage. He did not like to be flouted, he did not like his cards, he did not like to lose money, and he had already lost a lot between luncheon and the impending dinner. Why the devil I continue to hold all these three-card suits I do not know, he said savagely. Is not there another pack in the house? There was, said Malcourt, and ironically condoled with him as Portlaw accomplished a little slam in hearts. Then Trestlevane dealt, and Malcourt's eyes never left his brother-in-law's hands as they distributed the cards with nervous rapidity. Miss Deal, he said quietly. What? Demanded his sister in sharp protest. It's a Miss Deal, repeated Malcourt, smiling at her, and as Trestlevane, half the pack suspended, gazed blankly at him, Malcourt turned and looked him squarely in the eye. The other reddened. Too bad, said Malcourt, with careless good humor, but one has to be so careful in dealing the top card, Herbie. You stumble over your own fingers, they are too long, or perhaps it's that ring of yours. A curious, almost ghastly glance passed involuntarily between the Trestlvanes. Portlaw, who was busy lighting a cigar, did not notice it, but Malcourt laughed lightly and ran over the score, adding it up with a nimble accuracy that seemed to stun his relatives. Why, look what's here, he exclaimed, genially displaying a total that balanced all Portlaw's gains and losses to date. Why, is not that curious, Helen? Right off the bat like that cricket bat, he explained affably to Trestlevane, who, as dinner was imminent, had begun fumbling for his checkbook. At Malcourt's suave suggestion, however, instead of drawing a new check, he returned Portlaw's check. Malcourt took it, tore it carefully in 2 equal parts. Half for you, William, half for me, he said gaily. Me, what strange things do happen in Cardsend in the British Isles. The dull flush deepened on Trestlvane's averted face, but Lady Trestlevane, unusually pale, watched her brother persistently during the general conversation that preceded dressing for dinner. Chapter 26, Sealed Instructions. After the guests had gone away to dress, Portlaw looked inquiringly at Malcourt and said, That Miss Deal may have been a slip. I begin to believe I was mistaken after all. What do you think, Louis? Malcourt's eyes wandered toward his wife, who still bent low over her sewing. I do not think, he said absently, and sauntered over to Sheila, saying, It's rather dull for you, is not it? She made no reply until Portlaw had gone upstairs, then looking around at him. Is there any necessity for me to sit here while you play cards this evening? No, if it does not amuse you. Amuse her? She rested her elbow on the window ledge, and chin on hand, stared out into the gray world of Rainth world that had been so terribly altered for her forever. In the room shadows were gathering, the dull light faded. Outside it rained over land and water, over the encircling forest which walled in this stretch of spectral world where the monotony of her days was spent. To the sadness of it she was slowly becoming inured, but the strangeness of her life she could not yet comprehend its meaningless days and nights, its dragging hours and the strange people around her immersed in their sordid, pleasure-rest this woman her husband's sister, thin-lipped, hard-featured, drinking, smoking, gambling, shrill in disputes, merciless of speech, venomously curious concerning all that she held locked in the privacy of her wretchedness. Sheila, he said, why do not you pay your family a visit? She shook her head. You are afraid they might suspect that you are not particularly happy. Yes, it was wrong to have Gray and Cecil here, it was fortunate you were away, but they saw the Trestlvanes. What did they think of em? Inquired Malcourt. What do you suppose they would think? Quite right? Well, do not worry, hold out a little longer. This is a ghastly sort of pantomime for you, but there's always a grand transformation scene at the end. Who knows how soon the curtain will rise on fairyland and the happy lovers, and all that bright and sparkling business. Children demand it must have it, and you are very young yet. He laughed, seeing her perplexed expression. You do not know what I mean, do you? Listen, Shiela, stay here to dinner if you can stand my relatives. We will not play cards. You will really find it amusing, I think. Do you wish me to stay? Yes, I do. I want you to see something. A few moments afterward, she took her umbrella and waterproof and went away to dress, returning to a dinner table remarkable for the silence of the diners. Something, too, had gone wrong with the electric plant, and after-dinner candles were lighted in the living room. Outside it rained heavily. Malcourt sat beside his wife, smoking, and unaided, sustaining what conversation there was. And after a while he rose, dragged a heavy, solid wooden table to the middle of the room, placed 5 chairs around it, and smilingly invited Shiela, the Trestlvanes, and Portlaw to join him. A séance in table-tipping, asked his sister coldly. Really, Louis, I think we are rather past such things. I never saw a bally table tip, observed Trestlvane. How do you do it, Louis? I do not at tips. Come, Shiela, if you do not mind. Come on, Billy. Trestlvane seated himself and glanced furtively about him. I dare say you are all in this game, he said, with a rattling laugh. It's no game. If the table tips it tips, and our combined weight cannot hold it down, said Malcourt. If it will not tip it will not, and I will bet you $100 that you cannot tip it, Herbie. Trestlvane, pressing his hands hard on the polished edge, tried to move the table. Then he stood up and tried. It was too heavy and solid, and he could do nothing except by actually lifting it or by seizing it in both hands and dragging it about. One by one, reluctantly, the others took seats around the table, and, as instructed by Malcourt, rested the points of their fingers on the dully polished surface. Does it really ever move? Asked Shiela of Malcourt. It sometimes does. What's the explanation? Demanded Portlaw incredulously, spirits. I do not think anybody here would credit such an explanation, said Malcourt. The table moves or it does not. If it does, you will see it. I will leave the explanation to you, William. Have you ever seen it move? Asked Shiela, turning again to Malcourt. Yes, so has my sister. It's not a trick. Lady Trestlvane looked bored but answered Shiela's inquiry. I have seen it often. Louis and I and my father used to do it. I do not know how it's done, and nobody else does. Personally, I think it's rather a stupid way to spend an evening. But interrupted Portlaw, there will be nothing stupid about it if the table begins to tip up here under our very fingers. I will bet you, Louis, that it does not. Do you care to bet? Should not the lights be put out? Asked Trestlvane. Malcourt said it was not necessary, and cautioned everybody to sit absolutely clear of the table, and to rest only the tips of the fingers very lightly on the surface. Can we speak? Grinned Portlaw. Oh yes, if you like. A bright color glowed in Malcourt's face. He looked down dreamily at the top of the table where his hands touched. A sudden quiet fell over the company. Shiela, sitting with her white fingers lightly brushing the smooth mahogany, bent her head, mind wandering, and her thoughts were very far away when, under her sensitive touch, a curious quiver seemed to run through the very grain of the wood. What's that? Exclaimed Portlaw. Deep in the wood, wave after wave of motion seemed to spread, until the fibers emitted a faint splintering sound. Then, suddenly, the heavy table rose slowly, the end on which Shiela's hands rested sinking, and fell back with a solid shock. That's Thurod, muttered Trestlvane. Portlaw's distended eyes were fastened on the table, which was now heaving uneasily like a boat at anchor, creaking, cracking, rocking under their fingertips. Trestlvane rose from his chair and tried to see, but as everybody was clear of the table, and their fingers barely touched the top, he could discover no visible reason for what was occurring so violently under his very pointed nose. It's like a bally earthquake, he said in amazement. God bless my soul, the thing is walking off with us. Everybody had risen from necessity. Chairs were pushed back, skirts drawn aside as the heavy table, staggering, lurching, moved out across the floor, and they all followed, striving to keep their fingertips on the top. Portlaw was speechless. Sheila pale, tremulous, bewildered. Trestlevaine's beady eyes shone like the eyes of a surprised rat, but his wife and Malcourt took it calmly. "The game is," said Malcourt, "to ask whether there is a spirit present, and then recite the alphabet. Shall I? It is not frightening you, is it, Sheila?" "No, but I do not understand why it moves." "Neither does anybody. But you see it, feel it. Nor can anybody explain why an absurd question and reciting the alphabet sometimes results in a coherent message. Shall I try it, Helen?" His sister nodded indifferently. There was a silence, then Malcourt, still standing, said quietly, "Is there a message?" From the deep, woody center of the table 3 loud knocks sounded, almost ripped out, and the table quivered in every fiber. "Is there a message for anybody present?" 3 raps followed in a startling volley. "Get the chairs," motioned Malcourt, and when all were seated clear of the table but touching lightly the surface with their fingertips. "A B C D E F," began Malcourt, slowly reciting the alphabet, and as the raps rang out, signaling some letter, he began again in a monotonous voice. "A B C D E F G," pausing as soon as the raps arrested him at a certain letter, only to begin again. "Get a pad and pencil," whispered Lady Trestlevane to Sheila. So Sheila left the table, found a pad and pencil, and seated herself near a candle by the window, and as each letter was rapped out by the table, she put it down in order. The recitation seemed endless. Malcourt's voice grew hoarse with the repetition. Letter after letter was added to the apparently meaningless sequence on Sheila's pad. "Is there any sense in it so far?" asked Lady Trestlevane. "I cannot find any," said Sheila, striving with her pencil point to divide the string of letters into intelligible words. And still Malcourt's monotonous voice droned on, and still the raps sounded from the table. Portlaw hung over it as though hypnotized. Trestlevane had fallen to moistening his lips with the tip of his tongue, stealthy eyes, always roaming about the candlelit room, as though searching for something uncanny lurking in the shadows. Sheila shivered, wittied, as she sat watching the table, which was now snapping and cracking and heaving under her gaze. A slow fear of the thing crept over Hero, this senseless, lifeless mass of wood, fashioned by human hands. The people around it, the room, the house were becoming horrible to her. She loathed them and what they were doing. A ripping crash brought her to her feet. Everybody sprang up. Under their hands the table was shuddering convulsively. Suddenly it split open as though rent by a bolt, and fell like a live thing in agony, a mass of twisted fibers protruding like viscera from its shattered core. Stunned silence, and Malcourt turned to his sister and spoke in a low voice, but she only shook her head, shivering, and stared at the wreck of wood as though revolted. What happened?" faltered Portlaw, bewildered. "I do not know," said Malcourt unsteadily. "Do not know, look at that table. Why, man, it sits dying." Trestlevane stood as though stupefied. Malcourt walked slowly over to where Sheila stood. She shrank involuntarily away from him as he bent to pick up the pad which had fallen from her hands. "There's nothing to be frightened about," he said, forcing a smile, and holding the pad under the light, scanned it attentively. His sister came over to him, asking if the letters made any sense. He shook his head. They studied it together, Sheila's fascinated gaze riveted on them both. And she saw Lady Trestlvane's big eyes widen as she laid her pencil on a sequence, saw Malcourt's quick nod of surprised comprehension when she checked off a word, then another, another. And suddenly her face turned white to the lips, and she caught at her brother's arm, terrified. "Will you keep quiet?" he whispered fiercely, snatching the sheet from the pad and crumpling it into his palm. Sister and brother faced each other. In his eyes leaped a flame infernal which seemed to hold her paralyzed for a moment. Then, with a gesture, she swept him aside, and covering her eyes with her hands, sank into a chair. "What a fool you are," he said furiously, bending down beside her. "It's in us both. You will do it, too, when you are ready if you have any sporting blood in you." And straightening up impatiently, his eyes fell on Sheila, and he shrugged his shoulders and smiled resignedly. It's nothing. My sister's nerves are a bit upset after all. This parlor magic is a stupid mistake, because there's always somebody who takes it seriously. It's only humbug anyway, you know that, do not you, Sheila? He untwisted the paper in his hand, and held it in the candle flame until it burned to cinders. What was there on that paper? Asked Sheila, managing to control her voice. Why, merely a suggestion that I travel, he said coolly. I cannot see why my sister should make a fool of herself over the idea of my going on a journey. I have meant to, for years, to rest myself. I have told you that often, have not I, Sheila? She nodded slowly, but her eyes reverted to the woman crouching in the chair, face buried in her brilliantly jeweled hands. Portlaw and Trestlevane were also staring at her. You would better go to bed, Helen, said Malcourt coolly, and turned on his heel, lighting a cigarette. A little later, the Trestlvanes and Sheila started across the lawn to their own apartments, and Malcourt went with them to hold an umbrella over his wife. In the lower hall, they separated with scarcely a word, but Malcourt detained his brother-in-law by a significant touch on the arm and drew him into the library. So you're leaving tomorrow? He asked. What? Said Trestlevane. I say that I understand you and Helen are leaving us tomorrow. I had not thought of leaving, said Trestlevane. Think again, suggested Malcourt. What do you mean? Malcourt walked up very close and looked him in the face. Must I explain? He asked contemptuously. I will if you like, you clumsy card-slipping, a separaking blackguard. The station wagon will be ready at 7. See that you are too. Now go and tell my sister. It may reconcile her to various ideas of mine. And he turned, and walking to a leather-covered chair drawn up beside the library table, seated himself and opened a heavy book. Trestlevane stood absolutely still, his close-set eyes fairly starting from his face, in which not a vestige of color now remained. And when at length he left the room, he left so noiselessly that Malcourt did not hear him. However, Malcourt happened to be very intent upon his own train of thought, so absorbed, in fact, that it was a long while before he looked up and around, as though somebody had suddenly spoken his name. But it was only the voice which had sounded so often and familiarly in his ears, and he smiled and inclined his graceful head to listen, folding his hands under his chin. He seemed very young and boyish there, leaning both elbows on the library table, head bent expectantly as he listened, or lifted when he, in turn, spoke aloud. And sometimes he spoke gravely, argumentatively, sometimes almost flippantly, and once or twice his laugh rang out through the empty room. In the forest, a heavy wind had risen. Somewhere outside, a door or shutter banged persistently. He did not hear it, but Sheila, sleepless in her room above, laid down Hamel's book. Then, thinking it might be the outer door left carelessly unlocked, descended the stairs with lighted candle. Passing the library and hearing voices, she halted, astonished to see her husband there alone, and as she stood, perplexed and disturbed, he spoke as though answering a question. But there was no one there who could have asked it. The room was empty save for that solitary figure. Something in his voice terrified Heron, the uncanny monologue, which meant nothing to Heron, his curiously altered laugh and his intent, listening attitude. It was not the first time she had seen him this way. Louis, she exclaimed, what are you doing? He turned dreamily toward her, rose as in a trance. Oh, is it you? Come in here. I cannot, I am tired. So am I, Sheila, tired to death. What time is it? After 10, I think, if that clock is right. She entered, reluctant, uncertain, peering up at the clock. Then, I thought the front door had been left open and came down to lock it. What are you doing here at this hour? I thought I heard you talking. I was talking to my father. What? She said, startled. Pretending to, he added wearily, sit down. Do you wish me? Yes, sit down. She looked fearfully at him, hesitated, and slowly seated herself on the arm of a lounge. What is it ya want, Louis? She faltered, every nerve on edge. Nothing much, a kindly word or two. What do you mean, have I ever been unkind? I am too unhappy to be unkind to anybody. Suddenly her eyes filled. Do not do that, he said. You are always civil to men, never unkind. By the way, my relatives leave tomorrow. That will comfort you, will not it? She said nothing. He leaned heavily on the table, dark face framed in both hands. Sheila, when a man is really tired, do not you think it reasonable for him to take a rest and give others one? I do not understand. A rather protracted rest is good for tired people, is not it? Yes, if. In fact, with a whimsical smile, a sort of endlessly eternal rest ought to cure anybody. Do not you think so? She stared at him. Do you happen to remember that my father, needing a good long rest, took a sudden vacation to enjoy it? I don't know what you mean, tremulously. You remember how he started on that restful vacation, which he is still enjoying. A shudder ran over her. She strove to speak, but her voice died in her throat. My father, he said dreamily, seems to want me to join him during his vacation. Louis! What are you frightened about? It's as good a vacation as any otherly one takes, no luggage and pays, no hotel bills. Have not you any sense of humor left in you, Sheila? I am not serious. She said, trembling and very white, I thought you meant it. Then she rose with a shiver, turned, and mounted the stairs to her room again. But in the stillness of the place something was already at work on her, for a slow dawning alarm at the silence, the loneliness, the forests, the rain, a growing horror of the place, of the people in it, of this man the world called her husband, of his listening silences, his solitary laughter, his words spoken to something unseen in empty rooms, his awful humor. Her very knees were shaking under her now. She stared around her like a trapped thing, desperate, feeling that self-control was going in sudden, ungovernable panic. Scarcely knowing what she was about, she crept to the telephone and, leaning heavily against the wall, placed the receiver to her ear. For a long while she waited, dreading lest the operator had gone. Then a far voice hailed her. She gave the name, waited interminable minutes until a servant's sleepy voice requested her to hold the wire. And at last. Is it you? Gary, could you come here tonight? Danger? No, I am in no danger, I am just frightened. I do not know what is frightening me. No, not 99. It's only that I am so horribly alone here in the rain. I cannot seem to endure it. She was speaking almost incoherently, now, scarcely conscious of what she was saying. There's a man downstairs who talks in empty rooms and listens to things I cannot hear, listens every day. I tell you, I have seen him often I mean Louis Malcourt. And I cannot endure it, the table that moves, and the Gary, take me away with you. I cannot stand it any longer. Will you come? Tonight, Gary. How long will you be? I simply cannot stay alone in this house until you come. I will go down and saddle my... What? Oh yes, I know what I am doing. Yes, I do remember, but we will not you take me away from. I know it, oh, I know it. I am half crazed, I think. Yes. I do care for them still, but... Oh Gary, Gary, I will be true to them. I will do anything you wish, only come, come, come. You promise? At once. She hung up the receiver, turned, and flung open the window. Over the wet woods, a rain-washed moon glittered. The long storm had passed. An hour later, as she kneeled by the open window, her chin on her arms, watching for him, out of the shadow and into the full moonlight galloped a rider who drew bridle on the distant lawn, waving her a gay gesture of reassurance. It was too far for her to call. She dared not descend, fearing the dogs might wake the house. And in answer to his confident salute, she lighted a candle, and against the darkness, drew the fiery outline of a heart. Then extinguishing the light, she sank back in her big chair, watching him as he settled in his stirrups for the night-long vigil that she meant to share with him till dawn. The whole night long once more together. She thrilled at the thought of it, at the memory of that other night, and dawn under the southern planets, where a ghostly ocean thundered at their feet, where her awakened heart quickened with the fear of him, and all her body trembled with the blessed fear of him, and every breath was delicious with terror of the man who had come this night to guard her. Partly undressed, head cradled in her tumbled hair, she lay there in the darkness watching him, her paladin, on guard beneath the argent splendor of the moon. Under the loosened, silken vest her heart was racing, under the unbound hair her cheeks were burning. The soft lake breeze rippled the woodbine leaves along the sill, stirring the lace and ribbon on her breast. Hour after hour she lay there, watching him through the dreamy luster of the moon, all the mystery of her love for him tremulous within her. Once, on the edge of sleep, yet still awake, she stretched her arms toward him in the darkness, unconsciously as she did in dreams. Slowly the unreality of it all was enveloping her, possessed her as her lids grew heavy. In the dim silvery light she could scarcely see him now, a frail mist-belted horse and rider, stretching fairy barriers across the lawn. Suddenly, within her, clear, distinct, a voice began calling to him imperiously, but her lips never moved. Yet she knew he would hear, surely he heard. Surely, surely, for was he not already drifting toward her through the moonlight, nearer, here under the palms and orangetree at her feet, holding her close, safe, strong, till faint with the happiness of dreams come true, she slept, circled by his splendid arms. And while she lay there, lips scarce parted, sleeping quietly as a tired child, he sat his mud-splashed saddle, motionless under the moon, eyes never leaving her window for an instant, till at last the far dawn broke and the ghostly shadows fled away. Then in the pallid light, he slowly gathered bridle and rode back into the southern forest, head heavy on his breast. Chapter 27. Malcourt Listens. Malcourt was up and ready before 7 when his sister came to his door, dressed in her pretty blue traveling gown, hatted, veiled, gloved to perfection. But there was a bloom on cheek and mouth which mocked at the wearied lassitude in every step as she slowly entered and seated herself. For a moment neither spoke. Her brother was looking at her narrowly, and after a while she raised her veil, turning her face to the merciless morning light. "Paint," she said, "and I am little older than you. You will be younger than I am soon." She paled a trifle under the red. "Are you losing your reason, Louis?" "No, but I have contrived to lose everything else. It was a losing game from the beginning for both of us. Are you going to be coward enough to drop your cards and quit the game?" "Call it that, but the cards are marked and the game crooked as Herbie's." He began to laugh. "The world's dice are loaded, I have got enough." "Yet you beat Bertie in spite of." "For Portlaw's sake. I would not fight with marked cards for my own sake. Faugh, the world plays a game too rotten to suit me. I will drop my hand and take a stroll for a little fresh air out yonder." He waved his arm toward the rising sun. "Just a step into the fresh air, Helen." "Are you not afraid?" She managed to form the words with stiffened lips. "Afraid?" He stared at her. "No, neither are you. You will do it too some day. If you do not want to now, you will later. If you have any doubts left, they will not last. We have no choice, it's in us. We do not belong here, Helen, we are different. We did not know until we would try to live like other people, and everything went wrong." A glint of humor came into his eyes. "I have made up my mind that we are extraterrestrial, something external and foreign to this particular star. I think it's time to ask for a transfer and take the star ahead." Not a muscle moved in her expressionless face. He shrugged and drew out his watch. "I am sorry, Helen. Is it time to go?" "Yes, why do you stick to that little cockney pup?" "I do not know. You ruined a decent man to pick him out of the gutter. Why do not you drop him back?" "I do not know. Do you all care for him?" "No." "Then why?" She shook her head. "Quite right," said Malcourt, rising. "You are in the wrong planet too, and the sooner you realize it, the sooner we will meet again. Goodbye. She turned horribly pale, stammering something about his coming with her, resisting a little as he drew her out, down the stairs, and aided her to enter the depot wagon. There he kissed her, and she caught him around the neck, holding him convulsively. Nonsense, he whispered. I have talked it all over with father, he and I will talk it over some day with you. Then you will understand. And backing away he called to the coachman, drive on, ignoring his brother-in-law, who sat huddled in a corner, glassy eyes focused on him. Portlaw almost capered with surprise and relief when at breakfast he learned that the Trestlvanes had departed. Oh, everything is coming everybody's way, said Malcourt gaily, like the last chapter of a bally novel, the old-fashioned kind, Billy, where Nemesis gets busy with a gun and kind Providence hitches him up in ever-after blocks of two. It takes a rotten novelist to use a gun on his villains. It's never done in decent literature, never done anywhere, except in real life. He swallowed his coffee and, lighting a cigarette, tipped back his chair, balancing himself with one hand on the table. The use of the gun, he said lazily, is obsolete in the modern novel. The theme now is how to be passionate though pure. Personally, being neither one nor the other, I remain uninterested in the modern novel. Real life, said Portlaw, spearing a fishball, is damn monotonous. The only gunplay is in the morning papers. Sure, nodded Malcourt, and there's too many shooting items in M every day to make gunplay available for a novel once. When I thought I could write just after I left Collegethy took me aboard a morning newspaper, on the strength of a chance, I had to discover a missing woman. She was in hiding. Her name had been horribly spattered in a divorce, and the poor thing was in hiding, had changed her name, crept off to a little town in Delaware. Our enlightened press was hunting for her. To find her was termed a scoop. I believe Welby's pull legs off grasshoppers and do other damnable things without thinking I found her, so as I knocked at her door in the mean little farmhouse down there in Delaware, she opened it. Smillingsh was quite pretty and blew her brains out in my very face. "WH what?" bawled Portlaw, dropping knife and fork. I want to see that girl again sometime," said Malcourt thoughtfully. "I would like to tell her that I did not mean it case of boy and grasshopper. You know well, as you say, gunplay has no place in real novels. There would not be room anyway, with all the literature and illustrations and purpose and purple preciousness, as anachronismatically superfluous as sleigh bells in hell." Portlaw resumed his egg. Malcourt considered him ironically. "Sporty Porty, are you going to wed the pretty lady of Pride's Hall at Pride's Fall some blooming day in June?" "None of your infernal business." "Quite so. I only wanted to see how the novel was coming out before somebody takes the book away from me." "You talk like a pint of shoestrings," growled Portlaw. "You would better find out whose horse has been denting the lawn all over and tearing off several yards of sod." "I know already," said Malcourt. "Well, who had the nerve to?" "None of your bally business, dear friend. Are you riding over to Pride's today?" "Yes, I am. I think I will go too." "You are not expected." "That's the charm of it, old fellow. I did not expect to go, they do not expect me, they do not want me, I want to go. All the elements of a delightful surprise, do you notice?" Portlaw said irritably, "They asked Mrs. Malcourt and me. Nothing was said about you." "Something will be said if I go," observed Malcourt cheerfully. Portlaw was exasperated. "There's a girl there you behaved badly to, you would better stay away." Malcourt looked innocently surprised. "Now who could that be? I have, it is true, at times misbehaved, but I cannot ever remember behaving badly." Portlaw, too mad to speak, strode wrathfully away toward the stables. Malcourt was interested to see that he could stride now without waddling. "Marvelous, marvelous, the power of love." He mused sentimentally. "Porty is no longer Rottendenly majestically portly. See where he hastens lightly to his Alida. Shepherd fair and maidens all. Torilurl. Torilurl." And very gracefully, he sketched a step or two in contradance to his own shadow on the grass. Shepherd fair and maidens all. Truly rural. Tourlural. Man prefers his maidens plural. One is none, he wants them all. Tourlural. Tourlural. And he sauntered off humming gaily, making playful passes at the trees with his riding crop as he passed. Later he aided his wife to mount, and stood looking after her as she rode away, Portlaw pounding along heavily beside her. All alone with the daisies, he said, looking around him when they had disappeared. Toward noon he ordered a horse, ate his luncheon in leisurely solitude, read yesterday's papers while he smoked, then went out, mounted, and took the road to Pride's Fall, letting his horse choose his own pace. Moving along through the pretty forest road, he glanced casually right and left as he advanced, tapping his riding boots in rhythm to the air he was humming in a careless undertone, something about a shepherd and the plural tastes of man. His mood was inspired by that odd merriment which came from sheer perversity. When the depths and shallows of his contradictory character were disturbed, a ripple of what passed for mirth covered all the surface. If there was any profundity to the man, the ripple obscured it. No eye had ever penetrated the secrecy of what lay below, none ever would. Perhaps there was nothing there. He journeyed on, his horse ambling or walking as it suited him, or sometimes veering to stretch a long glossy neck and nip at a bunch of leaves. The cock partridge stood on his drumming glog and defied the forest rider, all unseen. Rabbit and squirrel sat bolt upright with palpitating flanks and moist bright eyes at gaze. Overhead the slow hawk sailed, looking down at him as he rode. Sometimes Malcourt whistled to himself, sometimes he sang in a variably agreeable voice, and now and then he quoted the poets, taking pleasure in the precision of his own diction. C'est le jour des morts. Mirliton, Merlitain. Requiescent in pace. He chanted, and quoted more of the same bard with a grimace, adding, as he spurred his horse, Poet and nascitur, non-fit, the poet's nasty and not fit. Zut, baum boom, get along, old fellow, or we will never see the pretty ladies of Pride's this blooming day. There was a shorter cut by a spotted trail, and when he saw the first blaze glimmering through the leaves, he steered his horse toward it. The sound of voices came distantly from the wooded heights above, far laughter, the faint aroma of a wood fire. No doubt some picnickers trespassing as usual, but that was Mrs. Scott's affair. A little later, far below him, he caught a glimpse of a white gown among the trees. There was a spring down there somewhere in that thicket of silver birches. Probably one of the trespassers was drinking. So, idly curious, he rode that way, his horse making no sound on the thick moss. If she's ornamental, he said to himself, I will linger to point out the sin of trespassing. That is, if she is sufficiently ornamental. His horse stepped on a dead branch which cracked. The girl in white, who had been looking out through the birch trees across the valley, turned her head. They recognized each other even at that distance. He uttered a low exclamation of satisfaction, sprang from his saddle, and led his horse down among the mossy rocks of the watercourse to the shelf of rock, overhanging the ravine, where she stood as motionless as one of the silver saplings. Virginia, he said, humorously abashed, shall I say I am glad to see you, and how do you do, and offer you my hand, or had I better not? He thought she meant to answer. Perhaps she meant to, but found no voice at her disposal. He dropped his bridle over a branch, and drawing off his gloves, walked up to where she was standing. I knew you were at Pride's Hall, he said. I am aware, also, that nobody there either expected or wished to see me. But I wanted to see you, and little things of that sort could not keep me away. Where are the others? She strove twice to answer him, then turned abruptly, steadying herself against a birch tree with one arm. Where are the others, Virginia? He asked gently. On the rocks beyond. Picnicking. Yes. How charming, he said, as though one could not see enough country out of one's windows every minute in the year. But you cannot tell where sentiment will crop up. Some people do not object to chasing ants off the dishes and fishing sticks out of the milk. I do. It's rather fortunate I found you alone. Saves a frigid reception and cruel comments after I am gone, Virginia. He seated himself where the sunlight fell agreeably and looked off over the valley. A shrunken river ran below, a mere thread of life, through its own stony skeleton, a mockery of what it once had been before the white-hided things on two legs had cut the forest from the hills and killed its cool mossy sources in their channels. The crushers of pulp and the sawyers of logs had done their dirty work thoroughly, their acids and their sawdust poisoned and choked. Their devastation turned the tree-clothed hill flanks to arid lumps of sand and rock. He said aloud, to think of these trees being turned into newspapers. He looked up at her whimsically. The least I can do is to help grow them again. As a phosphate I might amount to something if I am carefully spaded in. And in a lower voice, just escaping mockery, "How are you, Virginia?" "I am perfectly well." "Are you well enough to sit down and talk to me for half an hour?" She made no reply. Do not be dignified. There is nothing more inartistic, except a woman who is trying to be brave on an inadequate income. She did not move or look at him. Virginia. What? Do you remember that day we met in the surf, and you said something insolent to me, and bent over, laying your palms flat on the water, looking at me over your shoulder? Yes. You knew what you were doing. Yes. This is part of the consequences. That's what life is, nothing but a game of consequences. I knew what I was doing. You admit you were responsible for yourself, and nothing but consequences have resulted ever since. Sit down and be reasonable and friendly, will not you? I cannot stay here. Try, he said, smiling, and made room for her on the sun-crisped moss. A little later she seated herself with an absent-minded air and gazed out across the valley. A leaf or two, prematurely yellow, drifted from the birches. It reminds me, he said thoughtfully, of that exquisite poem on autumn. The autumn leaves are falling. They are falling everywhere. They are falling in the atmosphere. They are falling in the air. And I do not remember any more, dear. Did you wish to say anything to me besides nonsense? She asked, flushing. Did you expect anything else from me? I had no reason to. Oh, I thought you might have been prepared for a little wickedness. She turned her eyes, more green than blue, on him. I was not unprepared. Nor I, he said gaily. Do not let's disappoint each other. You know our theory is that the old families are decadent, and I think we ought to try to prove any theory we advance in the interests of psychology. Do not you? I think we have proved it. He laughed, and passing his arm around her drew her head so that it rested against his face. That is particularly dishonorable, she said in an odd voice. Because I am married. Yes, and because I know it. That's true, you did not know it when we were at Palm Beach. That was tamer than this. I think now we can very easily prove our theory. And he kissed her, still laughing. But when he did it again, she turned her face against his shoulder. Courage, he said. We ought to be able to prove this theory of ours, you and I together. She was crying. If you are feeling guilty on Sheila's account, you needn't, he said. Did not you know she can scarcely endure me? Yis. Well then. No, Louis, I care too much. For yourself. No. For me, for Sheila, for public opinion. No. For what? I think it must be for just for being decent. He inspected her with lively interest. Hello, he said coolly, you are disproving our theory. She turned her face away from him, touching her eyes with her handkerchief. Or he added ironically, is there another man? No, she said without resentment, and there was a certain quality in her voice, new to him, a curious sweetness that he had never before perceived. Tell me, he said quietly, have you really suffered? Suffered, yes. You really cared for me. I do still. A flicker of the old malice lighted his face. But you will not let me kiss you, why? She looked up into his eyes. I feel as powerless with you as I was before. You could always have had your will. Once I would not have blamed you. Now it would be cowardly because I have forgiven myself. I will not disturb your vows, he said seriously. Then I think you had better go. I am going. I only wanted to see you again. May I ask you something, dear? Ask it, she said. Then you are going to get over this, are not you? Not as long as you live, Louis. Oh, and suppose I were not living? I do not know. You would recover, would not you? I do not know what you mean. Well, you would never have any other temptation. She turned scarlet. That is wicked. It certainly is, he said with great gravity, and I must come to the scarcely flattering conclusion that there is in me a source of hideous depravity, the unseen emanations of which, like those of the classic Upas tree, are purest poison to a woman morally constituted as you are. She looked up as he laughed, but there was no mirth in her bewildered eyes. There is something in you, Louis, which is fatal to the better side of me. The other Virginia could not endure me, I know. My other self learned to love your better self. I have none. I have seen it revealed in. Oh yes, he laughed, revealed in what you used to call one of my infernal flashes of chivalry. Yes, she said quietly, in that. He sat very still there in the afternoon sunshine, pondering, and sometimes his gaze searched the valley depths below, lost among the treetops. Sometimes he studied the far horizon, where the little blue hills stood up against the sky like little blue waves at sea. His hat was off. The cliff breeze played with his dark curly hair, lifting it at the temples, stirring the one obstinate strand that never lay quite flat on the crown of his head. Twice she looked around as though to interrupt his preoccupation, but he neither responded nor even seemed to be aware of her, and she sighed imperceptibly and followed his errant eyes with her own. At last. Is there no way out of it for you, Louis? I am not thinking of myself, she added simply. He turned fully around. If there was a way out, I would take it and marry you. I did not ask for that, I was thinking of you. He was silent. Besides, she said, I know that you do not love me. That is true only because I will not, I could. She looked at him. But he said calmly, I must not, because there is no way out for Methers, no way out of anything for Muhel. I live down here. Down where? On this exotic planet called the Earth, dear child, he said with mocking gravity. I am a sort of moonkuffa seed blown clear from Saturn's surface, which fell here and sprouted into the thing you call Louis Malcourt. And his perverse gaiety in full possession of him again, he laughed, and his mirth was tinctured with the bittersweet of that humorous malice which jeered unkindly only at himself. All to the bad, Virginie, all to the bowows, judging me from your narrow, earthly standard and the laws of your local divinity. That's why I want to see the real one and ask him how bad I really am. They would tell me down here that I will never see him. Zut, I will take that chance, not such a long shot either. Why, if I am no good, the risk is all the better. He is because of such as I. No need for him where all the babas are white as the driven snow, and all the little white doves keep their feathers clean and cuckoo hymns from dawn to sunset. By the way, I never gave you anything, did I? A Chinese god, for example. She shook her head, bewildered at his inconsequences. No, I never 999. You are not entitled to a gift of a Chinese god from me, but I have given 18 of them to a number of friends. I had 19, but never had 30 to present that 19th god. What do you mean, Louis? Oh, those gilded idols are the deities of secrecy. Their commandment is, thou shalt not be found out. So I distributed them among those who worship them, that is, I have so directed my executors. By the way, I made a new will. He looked at her cheerfully, evidently very much pleased with himself. And what do you think I have left to you? Louis, I do not. Why, the bridle, saddle, crop, and spurs I wore that day when we rode to the ocean. Do not you remember the day that you noticed me listening and asked me what I heard? Yis. And I told you, I was listening to my father. Again that same chilly tremor passed over her as it had then. The sun, over the Adirondack foothills, hung above bands of smoldering cloud. Presently it dipped into them, hanging triple-ringed, like Saturn on fire. It's time for you to go, he said in an altered voice, and she turned to find him standing and ready to aid her. A little pale with the realization that the end had come so soon, she rose and walked slowly back to where his horse stood munching leaves. Well, Virginia, goodbye, little girl. You will be all right before long. There was no humor left in his voice now, no mocking in his dark gaze. She raised her eyes to his in vague distress. Where are the others? He asked. Oh, up on those rocks. Yes, I see the smoke of their fire. Say goodbye to them for me not now some day. She did not understand him. He hesitated, smiled, and took her in his arms. Goodbye, dear, he said. Goodbye. They kissed. After she was halfway to the top of the rocks, he mounted his horse. She did not look back. She's a good little sport, he said, smiling, and gathering bridle, turned back into the forest. This time he neither sang nor whistled as he rode through the red splendor of the western sun, but he was very busy listening. There was plenty to hear, too. Wood thrushes were melodious in the late afternoon light. Infant crows cawed from high nests unseen in the leafy treetops. The stream's thin, silvery song threaded the forest quiet, accompanying him as he rode home. Home, yes, if this silent house where he dismounted could be called that. The place was very still. Evidently the servants had taken advantage of their masters' and mistresses' absence to wander out into the woods. Some of the stablemen had the dogs out, too. There was nobody in sight to take his horse, so he led the animal to the stables and found there a lad to relieve him. Then he retraced his steps to the house and entered the deserted garden where pearl-tinted spikes of iris perfumed the air and great masses of peonies nodded along borders banked deep under the long wall. A few butterflies still flitted in the golden radiance, but already that solemn harbinger of sunset, the garden toad, had emerged from leafy obscurity into the gravel path and hopped heavily forward as Malcourt passed by. The house-nothing can be as silent as an empty house. It showed his spurred tread from porch to stairway. He went up to the first landing, not knowing why, then roamed aimlessly through, wandering from room to room, idly, looking on familiar things as though they were strange, but uninteresting. Upstairs and down, in, around, and about he drifted, quiet as a cat, avoiding only his wife's bedroom. He had never entered it since their marriage. He did not care to do so now, though the door stood wide. And indifferent, he turned without even a glance, and traversing the hall, descended the stairs to the library. For a while he sat there, legs crossed, drumming thoughtfully on his boot with his riding crop, and after a while he dragged the chair forward and picked up a pen. Why not? He said aloud. It will save railroad fare and she will need it all. So to his lawyer in New York he wrote, I will not come to town after all. You have my letter, and you know what I want done. Nobody is likely to dispute the matter, and it will not require a will to make my wife carry out the essence of the thing. And signed his name. When he had sealed and directed the letter, he could find no stamp, so he left it on the table. That's the usual way they find such letters, he said, smiling to himself as the thought struck him. It certainly is hard to be original, but then I am not ambitious. He found another sheet of paper and wrote to Hamel. All the same, you are wrong. I have always been your friend. My father comes first, as always, you second. There is no third. This note, signed, sealed, and addressed, he left with the other. Certainly I am not original in the least, he said, beginning another note. Dolly dear, you have made good. Continuez, cheer and fantend. If you do not know what that means, your French lessons are in vain. Now the usual few words. Do not let any man who is not married to you lay the weight of his little finger on you. Do not ignore convention unless there is a good reason, and then do not. When you are tired of behaving yourself, go to sleep. And if you cannot sleep, sleep some more and then some. Men are exactly like women until they differ from them. There is no real mystery about either outside of popular novels. I am very, very glad that I have known you, Dolly. Do not tint yourself except for the footlights. There are other things, but I cannot think of them, and so. Louis Malcourt. This letter he sealed and laid with the others. It was the last. There was nothing more to do, except to open the table drawer and drop something into the side pocket of his coat. Malcourt had no favorite spots in the woods and fields around him. One trail resembled another. He cared as much for one patch of woods, one wild meadow, one tumbling brook as he did for the next, which was not very much. But there was one place where the sun-bronzed moss was deep and level, where, on the edge of a leafy ravine, the last rays of the sinking sun always lingered after all else lay in shadow. Here he sat down, thoughtfully, and for a little while remained in his listening attitude. Then, smiling, he lay back, pillowing his head on his left arm, and drew something from the side pocket of his coat. The world had grown silent. Across the ravine a deer among the trees watched him, motionless. Suddenly the deer leaped in an ecstasy of terror and went crashing away into obscurity, but Malcourt lay very, very still. His hat was off. The cliff breeze played with his dark curly hair, lifting it at the temples, stirring the one obstinate strand that never lay quite flat on the crown of his head. A moment later the sun set. Chapter 28. Hamel is silent. Late in the autumn, his aunt wrote Hamel from Sapphire Springs. There seems to be a favorable change in Sheila. Her aversion to people is certainly modified. Yesterday on my way to the hot springs I met her with her trained nurse, Miss Lester, face to face, and of course meant to pass on as usual, apparently without seeing her. But to my surprise she turned and spoke my name very quietly, and I said, as though we had parted the day before, I hope you're better. And she said, I think I am, very slowly and precisely, like a person who strives to speak correctly in a foreign tongue. Gary dear, it was too pathetic. She is so changed, beautiful, even more beautiful than before. But the last childish softness has fled from the delicate and almost undecided features you remember, and her face has settled into a nobler mold. Do you recollect in the Munich Museum an antique marble, by some unknown Greek sculptor, called Head of a Young Amazon? You must recall it because you have spoken to me of its noble and almost immortal loveliness. Dear, it resembles Sheila as she is knoweth that mysterious and almost imperceptible hint of sorrow in the tenderly youthful dignity of the features. We exchanged only the words I have written you. She passed her way leaning on Miss Lester's arm. I went for a mud bath as a precaution to our inherited enemy. If rheumatism gets me at last, it will not be the fault of your aged and timorous aunt. So that was all, yesterday. But today, as I was standing on the leafy path above the bathhouses, listening to the chattering of some excited birds recently arrived from the north in the first batch of migrants, Miss Lester came up to me and said that Sheila would like to see me, and that the doctors said there was no harm in her talking to anybody if she desired to do so. So I took my book to a rustic seat under the trees, and presently our little Sheila came by, leaning on Miss Lester's arm, and Miss Lester walked on, leaving her seated beside me. For quite 5 minutes, she neither spoke nor even looked at me, and I was very careful to leave the quiet unbroken. The noise of the birds were not singing, only chattering to each other about their trip seemed to attract her notice, and she laid her hand on mine to direct my attention. Her hand remained there. She has the same soft little hands, as dazzlingly white as ever, only thinner. She said, not looking at me, I have been 99, you understand that. Yes, I said, but it is all over now, is not it? She nodded listlessly, I think so. Again, but not looking at me, she spoke of her illness as dating from a shock received long ago. She is a little confused about the lapse of time, vague as to dates. You see, it is 4 months since Lewis did what he 999. She said nothing more, and in a few minutes Miss Lester came back for her. Now as to her mental condition. I have had a thorough understanding with the physicians, and one and all assure me that there is absolutely nothing the matter with her except the physical consequences of the shock, and those are wearing off. What she did, what she lived through with him, the dreadful tension, the endless insomnia all this and then, when the searching party was out all night long in the rain, and all the next day, and then, Gary, to have her stumble on him at dusk, that young girl, all alone, nerves strung to the breaking point, and to find him, that way. Was it not enough to account for this nervous demoralization? The wonder is that it has not permanently injured her. But it has not. She is certainly recovering. The dread of seeing a familiar face is less poignant. Her father was here today with Gray, and she saw them both. Now, dear, as for your coming here, it will not do. I can see that. She has not yet spoken of you, nor have I ventured to. What her attitude toward you may be I cannot guess from her speech or manner. Miss Lester told me that at first, in the complete nervous prostration, she seemed to have a morbid idea that you had been unkind to her, neglected and deserted her, left her to face some endless horror all alone. The shock to her mind had been terrible, Gary. Everything was grotesquely twisted. Had some fever. You know, and Miss Lester told me that it was too pitiful to hear her talk of you, and mix up everything with military jargon about outpost duty and the firing line, and some comrade who had deserted her under fire. All of which I mentioned, dear, so that you may, in a measure, comprehend how very ill she has been, and that she is not yet well by any means, and perhaps will not be for a long time to come. Tonight I had a very straight talk with Mr. Cardross. One has to talk straight when one talks to him. There is not in my mind the slightest doubt that he knows exactly now what misguided impulse drove Sheila to that distressing sacrifice of herself and you. And at first I was afraid that what she had done from a mistaken sense of duty might have hastened poor Louis' end. But Mr. Cardross told me that, from the day of his father's death, he had determined to follow in the same fashion, and had told Mr. Cardross of his intention more than once. So you see, it was in him in the blood. See what his own sister did to herself within a month of Louis' death. A strange family, an utterly incomprehensible race. And Mr. Cardross says that it happened to his father's father, and his father before him died by his own hand. Now there is little more news to write you, little more that could interest you, because you care only to hear about Sheila, and that is perfectly reasonable. However, what there is of news I will write you as faithfully as I have done ever since I came here on your service, under pretense of fighting gout, which, heaven be praised, has never yet waylaid me, unberufen. So to continue, the faithful three, Messrs. Classen, Kuyp, and Vetchen, do valiantly escort me on my mountain rides and drives. They are dears, all three, Gary, and it does not become you to shrug your shoulders. When I go to Palm Beach in January, they, as usual, are going too. I do not know what I should do without them, Virginia having decided to remain in Europe this winter. Yes, to answer your question, Mr. Wayward expects to cruise as far south as Palm Beach in January. I happen to have a note from him here on my desk, in which he asks me whether he may invite you to go with him. Is not it a tactful way of finding out whether you would care to be at Palm Beach this winter? So I shall write him that I think you would like to be asked. Because, Gary, I do believe that it is all turning out naturally, inevitably, as it was meant to turn out from the first, and that, some time this winter, there can be no reason why you should not see Sheila again. I know this, that Mr. Cardross is very fond of you, that Mrs. Cardross is also, that every member of that most wholesome family cares a great deal about you. As for their not being very fashionable people, their amiable freedom from social pretension, their very simple original that, in their case, affects me not at all where any happiness of yours is concerned. I do like old-time folk, and lineage smacking of New Amsterdam, but even my harmless snobbishness is now so completely out of fashion that nobody cares. You are modern enough to laugh at it. I am not. And I still continue faithful to my classons and kypes and vetchins and sidums, and to all that they stand for in Manhattanth rusty vestiges of bygone pomp and fussy circumstance of memories that cling to the early lords of the manors, the old patroons, entitled refugees all, this, I still cling toe-even to their shabbiness and stupidity and bad manners. Do not be too bitter in your amusement, for after all, you are kin to us. Do not be too severe on us, for we are passing, Gary, the descendants of patroon and refugee alike eth kypes, the Classons, the Van Diemen's, the Vetchins, the Sidum San James Wayward is the last of his race, and I am the last of the French refugees, and the Malcourts are already ended. Pax. True, it begins to look as if the gentleman adventurer stock which terminates in the Escots and Portlaws might be revived to struggle on for another generation. But Gary, we all, who intermarry, are doomed. Louis Malcourt was right. We are destined to perish. Still, we have left our marks on the nation. I care for no other epitaph than the names of counties, cities, streets which we have named with our names. But you, dear, you are wise in your generation and fortunate to love as you love. For God willing, your race will begin the welding of the old and new, the youngest and best of the nation. And at the feet of such a race the whole world lies. These letters from Constance Palliser to her nephew continued during the autumn and early winter, while he was at work on that series of public parks provided for by the metropolis on Long Island. Once he was obliged to return to Pride's Hall to inspect the progress of work for Mrs. Escott, and it happened during his brief stay there that her engagement was announced. I tell you what, Hamel, said Portlaw confidentially over their cigars, I never thought I could win her, never in the world. Besides, poor Louis was opposed to it, but you know when I make up my mind. I know, said Hamel. That's it. First, a man must have a mind to make up, then he must have enough intelligence to make it up. Certainly, nodded Hamel. I am glad you understand me, said Portlaw, gratified. Alida understands me. Why do you know that? Somehow, everything I think of she seems to agree to. In fact, sometimes in one or two unimportant matters, I actually believe that Mrs. Escott thought of what I thought of. A few seconds before I thought of it, he ended generously. But, and his expression became slyly portentous, it would never do to have her suspect it. I intend to be Caesar in my own house. Exactly, said Hamel solemnly, and Caesar's wife must have no suspicions. It was early November before he returned to town. His new suite of offices in Broad Street hummed with activity, although the lingering aftermath of the business depression prevented for the time being any hope of new commissions from private sources. But fortunately, he had enough public work to keep the office busy, and his dogged personal supervision of it during the racking suspense of Sheila's illness was his salvation. Twice a week his aunt wrote him from Sapphire Springs. Every day he went to his outdoor work on Long Island and forced himself to a minute personal supervision of every detail, never allowing himself a moment's brooding, never permitting himself to become panic-stricken at the outlook which varied from one letter to another. For as yet, according to these same letters, the woman he loved had never once mentioned his name. He found little leisure for amusement, even had he been inclined that way. Night found him very tired. Morning brought 100 self-imposed and complicated tasks to be accomplished before the advent of another night. He lived at his club and wrote to his aunt from there. Sundays were more difficult to negotiate. He went to St. George's in the morning, read in the club library, until afternoon permitted him to maintain some semblance of those social duties which no man has a right to entirely neglect. Now and then he dined out. Once he went to the opera with the O'Haras, but it nearly did for him, for they sang Madame Butterfly, and Ferrar's matchless voice and acting tore him to shreds. Only the happy can endure such tragedy. And one Sunday, Having pondered long that afternoon over the last letter Malcourt had ever written him, he put on hat and overcoat and went to Greenlawn Cemetery, a tedious journey through strange avenues and unknown suburbs, under a wet sky from which occasionally a flake or two of snow fell through the fine-spun drizzle. In the cemetery, the oaks still bore leaves which were growing while Malcourt was alive. Here and there a beech tree remained in full autumn foliage, and the grass on the graves was intensely green. But the few flowers that lifted their stalks were discolored and shabby, bare branches interlaced overhead. Dead leaves, wet and flattened, stuck to slab and headstone or left their stained imprints on the tarnished marble. He had bought some flowers violets and lilies at a florist's near the cemetery gates. These he laid, awkwardly, at the base of the white slab from which Malcourt's newly cut name stared at him. Louis Malcourt lay, as he had wished, next to his father. Also, as he had desired, a freshly planted tree, bereft now of foliage, rose, spindling, to balance an older one on the other corner of the plot. His sister's recently shaped grave lay just beyond. As yet, Bertie had provided no headstone for the late Lady Trestlevane. Hamel stood inspecting Malcourt's name, finding it impossible to realize that he was dead, or for that matter, unable to comprehend death at all. The newly chiseled letters seemed vaguely instinct with something of Malcourt's own clean-cut irony. They appeared to challenge him with their mocking legend of death, daring him, with sly malice, to credit the inscription. To look at them became almost an effort, so white and clear they stared back at him as though the pallid face of the dead himself, set forever in raillery, was on the watch to detect false sentiment and delight in it. And Hamel's eyes fell uneasily upon the flowers, then lifted. And he said aloud, unconsciously, "You are right, it's too late, Malcourt." There was a shabby, neglected grave in the adjoining plot. He bent over, gathered up his flowers, and laid them on the slab of somebody aged 93 whose name was blotted out by wet dead leaves. Then he slowly returned to face Malcourt and stood musing, gloved hands deep in his overcoat pockets. "If I could have understood you," he began, under his breath, then fell silent. A few moments later he uncovered. It was snowing heavily when he turned to leave, and he stood back and aside, hat in hand, to permit a young woman to pass the iron gateway, a slim figure in black, heavy veil drawn, arms piled high with lilies. He knew her at once, and she knew him. "I think you are Mr. Hamel," she said timidly. "You are Miss Wilming," he said in his naturally pleasant voice, which brought old memories crowding upon her and a pale flush to her cheeks. There was a moment's silence. She dropped some flowers and he recovered them for her. Then she knelt down in the sleet, unconscious of it, and laid the flowers on the mound, arranging them with great care, while the thickening snow pelted her and began to veil the white blossoms on the grave. Hamel hesitated after the girl had risen, and presently, as she did not stir, he quietly asked if he might be of any use to her. At first she made no reply, and her gaze remained remote. Then, turning, "Was he your friend?" she asked wistfully. "I think he meant to be." "You quarreled on there in the south." She made a vague gesture toward the gray horizon. "Do you remember that night, Mr. Hamel?" "Yes." "Did you ever become friends again?" "No, I think he meant to be. The fault was probably mine. I misunderstood." She said, "I know he cared a great deal for you." The man was silent. She turned directly toward him, pale, clear-eyed, and in the poise of her head a faint touch of pride. "Please do not misunderstand his friendship for me then. If you were his friend, I would not need to say this. He was very kind to me, Mr. Hamel." "I do not doubt it," said Hamel gravely. "And you do not mistake what I say." He looked her in the eyes, curious and, in a moment, convinced. "No," he said gently and offering his hand. "Men are very ignorant concerning one another. Women are wiser, I think." He took the slender, black-gloved hand in his. "Can I be of the least use to you?" he asked. "You have been," she sighed, "if what I said has taught you to know him a little better." A week later, when the curtain fell on the second act of the new musical comedy, The Inca. Critics preparing to leave questioned each other with considerable curiosity concerning this newcomer, Dorothy Wilming, who had sung so intelligently and made so much out of a subordinate part. Nobody seemed to know very much about her. Several nice-looking young girls and exceedingly respectable young men sent her flowers. Afterward they gathered at the stage entrance, evidently expecting to meet and congratulate her. But she had slipped away. And while they hunted high and low, and the last figurante had trotted off under the lamplights, Dolly lay in her own dark room, face among the pillows, sobbing her heart out for a dead man who had been kind to her for nothing. And at the same hour, across an ocean, another woman awoke to take up the raveled threadings of her life again, and through another day, remember Louis Malcourt, and all that he had left undone for kindness' sake. There were others, too, who were not likely to forget him, particularly those who had received, with some astonishment, a legacy apiece of one small Chinese gilded idol images, all of the Passian or of Kuan Yin, who rescues souls from hell with the mystic lotus prayer, Om Mane Padme Hum. But the true Catholicism, which perplexed the 18 legatees, lay in the paradox of the Mohammedan inscriptions across each lotus written in Malcourt's hand. I direct my face unto him who hath created, who maketh his messengers with 2 and 3 and 4 pairs of wings. And thou shalt see them going in procession. This is what ye are promised, for the last hour will surely come, there is no doubt thereof, but the greater part of men believe it not. Thus, facing the stars, I go out among them into darkness. Say not for me the Sabbat with the 99, for the 100th pearl is the immeasurable beyond praise, pearl of the 50 names in one, more precious than mercy, more priceless than compassion. Iman, thy splendid name is death. So lingered the living memory of Malcourt, among men a little while longer among women than, faded as shadows die at dusk, when the mala is told for the soul that waits the rosary of 1,000 beads. In January, the Ariane sailed with her owner aboard, but Hamel was not with him. In February, Constance Palliser wrote Hamel from Palm Beach. It is too beautiful here, and you must come. As for Sheila, I do not even pretend to understand her. I see her every day. Today I lunched with Mrs. Cardross, and Sheila was there, apparently perfectly well and entirely her former lovely self. Yet she has never yet spoken of you to me, and I learn from Mrs. Cardross, never to anybody as far as she knows. She seems to be in splendid health. I have seen her swimming, galloping, playing tennis madly. The usual swarm of devoted youth and smitten middle-age is in attendance. She wears neither black nor colors, only white, nor does she go to any sort of functions. At times, to me, she resembles a scarcely grown girl just freed from school and playing hard every minute with every atom of heart and soul in her play. Gray has an apology for a polo field and a string of ponies, and Sheila plays with the Mina crazy, reckless, headlong game, in which every minute my heart is in my mouth for fear somebody will cannon into her, or some dreadful swing of a mallet will injure her for life. But everybody is so sweet to Herand, it is delightful to see her with her own family, their pride and tenderness for her, and her devotion to them. Mrs. Cardross asked me today what I thought might be the effect on Sheila if you came, and dear, I could not answer. Mr. Cardross joined us, divining the subject of our furtive confab in the patio, and he seemed to think that you ought to come. There is no reason to hesitate in saying that the family would be very glad to count you as one of them. Even a little snob like myself can see that there is, in this desire of theirs, no motive except affection for you and for Sheila. And in a way, it's rather humiliating to recognize that they do not care a fig for the social advantage that must, automatically, accrue to the house of Cardross through such connections. I never thought that I should so earnestly hope for such an alliance for you, but I do, Gary. They are such simple folk with all their rich simple as gentle folk and sincere, utterly without self-consciousness, untainted by the sordid social ambitions which make so many of the wealthy abhorrent. There is no pretense about them, nothing of that uncertainty of self mingled with vanity which grows into arrogance or servility as the social weather vane veers with the breeze of fashion. Rather flowery that, for an old-fashioned spinster. But dear, there are other flowers than those of speech eloquent in the soft southern air flowers, everywhere outside my open window, where I sit writing you. I miss Virginia, but Sheila compensates when she can find time from her breathless pleasure chase to give me an hour or two at tea time. And Cecile, too, is very charming, and I know she likes me. Such a coquette. She has her own court among the younger set, and from her very severe treatment of young Gatewood on all occasions I fancy she may be kinder to him one day. Mrs. Carrick is not here this winter, her new baby keeping her in town, and Acton, of course, is only too happy to remain with her. As for Gray, he is a nice boy, a little slow, a trifle shy and retiring and overstudious, but his devotion to Sheila makes me love him. And he, too, ventured to ask me whether you were not coming down this winter to hunt along the Everglades with him and little Tiger. So, dear, I think perhaps you had better come. It really frightens me to give you this advice. I could not endure it if anything went wrong, if your coming proved premature. For it is true, Gary, that I love our little Sheila with all my aged, priggish, and prejudiced heart, and I should simply expire if your happiness, which is bound up in her, were threatened by any meddling of mine. Jim Wayward and I discuss the matter every day. I do not know what he thinks is so obstinate some days, and sometimes he is irritable when Gussie Vetchin and Kuyp talk too inalienably their hearts. I really do not know what I shall do with James Wayward. What would you suggest? On the heels of this letter went another. Gary dear, read this and then make up your mind whether to come here or not. This morning I was sitting on the Cardrosses' terrace knitting a red four-in-hand for Mr. Wayward is too snuffy in his browns and greys, and Mrs. Cardross was knitting one for Neville, and Cecile was knitting one for heaven knows who, and Sheila, swinging her polymallet, sat waiting for her ponith cunning little thing in her boots and breeches. I mean the girl, not the pony, dear oh my. I am getting involved and you are hurrying through this scrawl perfectly furious, trying to find out what I am talking about. Well then, I forgot for a moment that Sheila was there within earshot, and eyes on my knitting, I began talking about you to Mrs. Cardross, and I had been gossiping away quite innocently for almost a minute when I chanced to look up and noticed the peculiar expressions of Mrs. Cardross and Cecile. They were not looking at me. They were watching Sheila, who had slipped down from the parapet where she had been perched and now stood beside my chair listening. I hesitated, faltered, but did not make the mistake of stopping or changing the subject, but went on gaily telling about your work on the new Long Island Park system. And as long as I talked, she remained motionless beside me. They brought around her pony a new one, but she did not stir. Her mother and sister continued their knitting, asking questions about you now and then, apparently taking no notice of her. My monologue in praise of you became a triangular discussion, and all the while the pony was cutting up the marl drive with impatience, and Sheila never stirred. Then Cecile said to me quite naturally, I wish Gary were here, and looking up at Sheila she added, do not you? For a second or two there was absolute silence, and then Sheila said to me, does he know I have been ill? Of course, I said, and he knows that you are now perfectly well. She turned slowly to her mother. Am I? She asked. What, dear? Perfectly well. Certainly, replied her mother, laughing, well enough to break your neck on that horrid, jigging little pony. If Gary wants to see you alive, he would better come pretty soon. Come here. We all looked up at her. Oh, Gary. For a moment something came into her eyes that I never want to see their agony and, please God, never shall. A momentary light like a pale afterglow of terror. It went as it came, and the color returned to her face. Is he coming here? She asked calmly. Yes, I made bold to say. When? In a few days, I hope. She said nothing more about you, nor did one. A moment later she sent away her pony and went indoors. After luncheon, I found her lying in the hammock in the patio, eyes closed as though asleep. She lay there all the afternoon, an unusual thing for her. Toward sundown, as I was entering my chair to go back to the hotel, She came out and stood beside the chair looking at me as though she was trying to say something. I do not know what it might have been, for she never said it, but she bent down and laid her cheek against mine for a moment, and drew my head around, searching my eyes. I do not know whether I was right or wrong, but I said, "There is no one to compare with you, Shiela, in your new incarnation of health and youth. I never before knew you. I do not think you ever before knew yourself." "Not entirely," she said. "Do you now?" "I think so. May I ask you something?" I nodded, smiling. "Then there is only one thing I care for now, Tosh. Looked up toward the houseto, make them contenteto, make up to them what I can for all that I failed in. Do you understand?" "Yes," I said, "you sweet thing," and gave her a little hug, adding, "And that's why I am going to write a letter tonitat your mother's desiring my own." She said nothing more. My chair rolled away, and here's the letter that I told her I meant to write. "Now, dear, come if you think best. I do not know of any reason why you should not come. If you know of any, you must act on your own responsibility. Last winter, believing that she cared for you, I did an extraordinary thing. In fact, I intimated to her that it was agreeable for me to believe you cared for each other. And she told me very sweetly that I was in error. So I am not going to place Constance Palliser in such a position again. If there's any chance of her caring for you, you ought to know it and act accordingly. Personally, I think there is, and that you should take that chance and take it now. But for goodness sake, do not act on my advice. I am a perfect fool to meddle this way. Besides, I am having troubles of my own which you know nothing about. Oh, Gary dear, if you will come down, I may perhaps have something very, very foolish to tell you. Truly, there is no idiot like an old one, but I'm close, I think, to being happier than I ever was in all my life. God help us both, my dear, dear boy. Your faithful Constance. Chapter 29, Calypso's Gift. 2 days later, as his pretty aunt stood in her chamber, shaking out the chestnut masses of her hair before her mirror, an impatient rapping at the living room door sent her maid flying. "That's Gary," said Constance calmly, belting in her chamber robe of silk and twisting up her hair into one heavy lustrous knot. A moment later they had exchanged salutes, and holding both his hands in hers, she stood looking at him, golden brown eyes very tender, cheeks becomingly pink. "That miserable train is early, it happens once in a century. I meant to meet you, dear." "Wayward met me at the station," he said. There was a silence. Under his curious and significant gaze she flushed, then laughed. "Wayward said that you had something to tell me," he added. "Constance, is it?" "Yes." "You darling," he whispered, taking her into his arms. And she laid her face on his shoulder, crying a little, laughing a little. "After all these years, Gary, all these years. It is a long time Toto care for a man, a long, long time, but there never was any other, not even through that dreadful period." "I know." "Yes, you know I have cared for him, since I was a little girl." They stood a while talking tenderly, intimately of her new happiness and of the new man, Wayward. Both knew that he must bear his scars forever, that youth had died in him. But they were very confident and happy standing there together in the sunlight which poured into the room, transfiguring her. And she truly seemed as lovely, radiant, and youthful as her own young heart, unsullied, innocent, now, as when it yielded its first love so long ago amid the rosewood and brocades of the old-time parlor, where the sun fell across the faded roses of the carpet. "I knew it was so from the way he shook hands," said Hamel, smiling. "How well he looks, Constance. And as for you are a real beauty." "You do not think so. But say it, Gary, and now I think I had better retire and complete this unceremonious toilet, and you may stroll over to pay your respects to Mrs. Cardross in the meanwhile if you choose." He looked at her gravely. She nodded. "They all know you are due today." "Shiela." "Yes, be careful, Gary. She is very young after all. I think if I were you I would not even seem conscious that she had been ill, that anything had happened to interrupt your friendship. She is very sensitive, very deeply sensible of the dreadful mistake she made. And somehow, I think she is a little afraid of you, as though you might possibly think less of her. Heaven knows what ideas the young conjure to worry themselves and those they care for. She laughed, kissed him and bowed him out, and he went away to bathe and change into cool clothing of white serge. Later, as he passed through the gardens, a white oleander blossom fell, and he picked it up and drew it through his coat. Shadows of palm and palmetto stretched westward across the white shell road, striping his path. Early sunlight crinkled the lagoon. The little wild ducks steered fearlessly inshore, peering up at him with bright golden-earized eyes. Mullet jumped heavily, tumbling back into the water with splashes that echoed through the morning stillness. The stained bronze cannon still poked their ancient and flaring muzzles out over the lake. Farther along, crimson hibiscus blossoms blazed from every hedge, and above him, the stately plumes of royal palms hung motionless, tufting the trunks, which rose with the shaft-like dignity of slender Egyptian pillars into a cloudless sky. On he went, along endless hedges of azalea and oleander, past thickets of Spanish bayonet, under leaning coconut palms, and at last the huge banyan tree rose sprawling across the skyline, and he saw the white facades and red-tiled roofs beyond. All around him now, as the air grew sweet with the breath of orange blossoms, a subtler scent, delicately persistent, came to him on the sea wind, and he remembered it, the lilac perfume of chinaberry in bloom, Calypso's own immortal fragrance. And in the brilliant sunshine, there under green trees with the dome of blue above, unbidden, the shadows of the past rose up, and once more lantern-lit faces crowded through the aromatic dark. Once more the fountain's haze drifted across dim lawns. Once more he caught the faint, uncertain rustle of her gown close to him as she passed like a fresh breath through the dusk. Overhead a little breeze became entangled in the palmetto fronds, setting them softly clashing together, as though a million unseen elfin hands were welcoming his return. The big black and gold butterflies, beating up against the sudden air current, flapped back to their honeyed haven in the orange grove. Bold, yellow-eyed grackle stared at him from the grass. A bird like a winged streak of flame flashed through the jungle and was gone. And now every breath he drew was quickening his pulses with the sense of homecoming. He saw the red-bellied woodpeckers sticking like shreds of checked gingham to the trees, turning their pointed heads incuriously as he passed. The welling notes of a wren bubbled upward through the sunshot azure. High in the vault above an eagle was passing seaward, silver of tail and crest, winged with bronze, and everywhere on every side glittered the golden saffron dragonflies of the south like the play of sunbeams on a green lagoon. Under the sapodilla trees on the lawn, two aged, white-clad Negro servants were gathering fruit forbidden them, and at sight of him, two wrinkled black hands furtively wiped two furrowed faces free from incriminating evidence. Two solemn pairs of eyes rolled piously in his direction. "Monin sa, Mr. Hamill." "Good morning, Jonas. Good morning, Archimedes. Mr. Cardross is in the orange grove, I see." And smiling, past the guilty ones with a humorously threatening shake of his head. A black boy, grinning, opened the gate. The quick-stepping figure in white flannels glanced around at the click of the latch. "Hamill, good work, I am glad to see you." His firm, sunburnt hands closing over Hamill's glad all through. "Not as glad as I am, Mr. Cardross." "Yes, I am. Why did not you come before? The weather has been heavenly, everybody wanted you." "Everybody?" "Yes, I is of course. Well, look here, Hamill, I have no authority to discuss that matter, but her mother, I think, has made matters clear to her concerning our personal wishes, Miss, that what you are driving at." "Yes, may I ask her? I came here to ask her." "We all know that," said Cardross naively. "Your aunt is a very fine woman. Hamill, I do not see why you should not tell Sheila anything you want to. We all wish it." "Thank you," said the younger man. Their hand grip tightened and parted. Shoulder to shoulder they swung into step across the lawn, Cardross planting his white-shod feet with habitual precision. His hair and mustache were very white in contrast to the ruddy sunburnt skin, and he spoke of his altered appearance with one of his quick smiles. "They nearly had me in the panic, Hamill. The Shoshone weathered the scare by grace of God and my little daughter's generosity. And it came fast when it came. We were under bare poles, too, and I did not expect any cordiality from the clearing house. But Hamel, they classed us with the oldliners, and they acted most decently. As for my little daughter, and to his own, and Hamel's embarrassment, his clear eyes suddenly grew dim, and he walked forward a step or two, winking rapidly at the sky. Gray, bare of arm to the shoulder, booted and bareheaded, loped across the grass on his polypony, mallet at salute. Then he leaned down from his saddle and greeted Hamel with unspoiled enthusiasm. Sheila is practicing, and wants you to come over when you can and see us knock the ball about. It's a rotten field, but you cannot help that down here. And clapping his spurless heels to his pony, he saluted and wheeled away through the hammock. On the terrace, Mrs. Cardross took his hands in her tremulous and pudgy fingers. Are you sure you are perfectly well, Gary? Do not you think it safer to begin at once with a mild dose of quinine, and follow it every 3 hours with a— Amy, dear, murmured her husband, I am not dreaming of interfering, but I personally never saw a finer specimen of physical health than this boy you are preparing Tobe good to. Neville, you know absolutely nothing sometimes, observed his wife serenely, then looking up at the tall young man bending over her chair. You will not need as much as you required when you rode into the swamps every day, but you do not mind my prescribing for you now and then, do you, Gary? I was going to ask you to do it, he said, looking at Cardross unblushingly. And at such perfidy the older man turned away with an unfeigned groan just as Cecile, tennis bat in hand, came out from the hall, saw him, dropped the bat, and walked straight into his arms. Cecile observed her mother mildly. But I wish to hug him, mother, and he does not mind. Her mother laughed. Hamel, a trifle red, received a straightforward salute square on the mouth. That, she said with calm conviction, is the most proper and fitting thing you and I have ever done. Mother, you know it is. And passing her arm through Hamel's. Last night, she said under her breath, I went into Sheila's room to say good night, and we both began to cry a little. It was as though I were giving up my controlling ownership in a dear and familiar possession. We did not speak of you. I do not remember that we spoke at all from the time I entered her room to the time I left, which was fearfully late. But I knew that I was giving up some vague proprietary right in her that, today, that right would pass to another, and if I kissed you, Gary, it was in recognition of the passing of that right to yond happy acquiescence in it, dear, believe me. Happy, confident renunciation and gratitude for what must be. They had walked together to the southern end of the terrace. Below stretched the splendid forest vista set with pool and fountain. Under the parapet, in the new garden, red and white roses bloomed, and on the surface of spray-dimmed basins, the jagged crimson reflections of goldfish dappled every unquiet pool. Where is the new polo field? He asked. She pointed out an unfamiliar path curving west from the tennis courts, nodded, smiled, returning the pressure of his hand, and stood watching him from the parapet until he vanished in the shadow of the trees. The path was a new one to him, cut during the summer. For a quarter of a mile it wound through the virgin hammock, suddenly emerging into a sunny clearing where an old orange grove grown up with tangles of briar and vine had partly given place to the advance of the jungle. Something glimmered over there among the trees, a girl, coated and skirted in snowy white, sitting a pony, and leisurely picking and eating the great black mulberries that weighted the branches so that they bent almost to the breaking. She saw him from a distance, turned in her saddle, lifting her polomallet in recognition. And as he came, pushing his way across the clearing, almost shoulder-deep through weeds, from which the silver-spotted butterflies rose in clouds, she stripped off one stained glove and held out her hand to him. You were so long in coming, she managed to say calmly, I thought I would ride part way back to meet you, and fell a victim to these mulberries. Tempted and fell, you see, are you well? It is nice to see you. And as he still retained her slim white hand in both of his. What do you think of my new pony? She asked, forcing a smile. He's teaching me the real game I left the others when Gray came up. Kipe, Phil Gatewood, and some other men are practicing. You will play tomorrow, will not you? It's such a splendid game. She was talking at random now, as though the sound of her own voice were sustaining her with its nervous informality, and she chattered on in feverish animation, bridging every threatened silence with gay inconsequences. You play polo, of course. Tell me you do. You know perfectly well I do not. But you will try if I ask you. He still held her hand imprisoned, that fragrant, listless little hand, so lifeless, nerveless, unresponsive as though it were no longer a part of her, and she had forgotten it. I will do anything you wish, he said slowly. Then do not eat any of these mulberries until you are acclimated. I am sorry, they are so delicious, but I will not eat any more either. Nonsense, he said, bending down a heavily laden bough for her. Eat, daughter of Eve, this fruit is highly recommended. Oh, Gary, I am not such a pig as that. Well then, if you make me do it. She lifted her face among the tender leaves, detached a luscious berry with her lips, absorbed it reflectively, and shook her head with decision. The shadow of constraint was fast slipping from them both. You know you enjoy it, he insisted, laughing naturally. No, I do not enjoy it at all, she retorted indignantly. I will not taste another until you are ready to do your part. I have forgotten, Gary. Did the serpent eat the fruit he recommended? He was too wise, not being acclimated in Eden. She turned in her saddle, laughing, and sat looking down at him then, more gravely, at her ungloved hand which he still retained in both of his. Silence fell, and found them ready for it. For a long while they said nothing. She slipped one leg over the pommel and sat sideways, elbow on knee, chin propped in her gloved hand. At times her eyes wandered over the sunny clearing, but always reverted to him where he stood leaning against her stirrup and looking up at her as though he never could look enough. The faint, fresh perfume of chinaberry was in the air, delicately persistent amid the heavy odors from tufts of orange flowers clinging to worn-out trees of the abandoned grove. Your own fragrance, he said. She looked down at him, dreamily. He bent and touched with his face the hand he held imprisoned. There was once, he said, among the immortals a maid, Calypso, do you remember? Yes, she said slowly. I have not forgotten my only title to immortality. Their gaze met, then he stepped closer. She raised both arms, crossing them to cover her eyes. His arms circled her, lifted her from the saddle, holding her a moment above the earth, free, glorious, superb in her vivid beauty. Then he swung her to the ground, holding her embraced, and as she abandoned to him, one by one, her hands and mouth and throat, her gaze never left him, clear, unfaltering eyes of a child innocent enough to look on passion unafraid, fearless, confident eyes, wondering, worshipping in unison with the deepening adoration in his. I love you so, she said. I love you so for making me what I am. I can be all that you could wish for if you only say it. She smiled, unconvinced at his tender protest, wise, sweet eyes on his. What a boy you are sometimes, as though I did not know myself. Dear, it is for you to say what I shall be. I am capable of being what you think I am. Do not you know it, Gary? It is only. And locked in his embrace, she lifted her lips to his. She felt a cool, thin pressure on her finger and glanced down at the ring's sparkling white fire. She lifted her hand, doubling it, looked at the gem for a moment, laid it against her mouth. Then, with dimmed eyes. Your love, your name, your ring for this nameless girl. And what can I give for a bridal gift? What sweet nonsense. What can I give, Gary? Do not laugh. Calypso, dear. Yes, Calypso's offered immortal, loveless, deathless. It is all I have to give you, Gary. Will you take it? Take it, then. And locked in his embrace, she lifted her lips to his.